Morning, everybody. Welcome to the latest meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, Northampton County Council. First item on the agenda, apologies. I've had apologies from Councillor Birch, who's been substituted by Councillor Roy. Apologies from Councillor Brookfield, and apologies from Councillor Brown, being substituted by Michael Clark. We also had apologies from Susan Zeiss, the Monitoring Officer, and Malcolm Newsom, the Children's Commissioner, who I understand is on holiday at the moment. Item 2, are there any notifications of requests to address the meeting? I don't believe there are, no. And item 3, declaration of members' interests. Anybody? Good. Item 4 then, Chairman's announcements. First thing I'd like to say is that following a request from this committee, I met along with some of the vice chairs with the chief exec of NCC. That was to discuss concerns that some people had regarding getting answers to questions from scrutiny committee members. The assurance I got from the chief exec is that we should be getting timely responses to all of our questions, and she would be concerned if we're not, and requests that we tell her if there is a problem. Pragmatically, however, I think if you are not getting responses, it might be worth chasing up perhaps through James first of all before we bring the chief exec in. But the important point is that we should be getting answers to those legitimate questions. I'd also like to welcome various members of Northamptonshire Borough Councils from both Kettering and Wellingborough. As a committee, we've spoken before how important it is moving towards unitary, that we all sort of start to understand our various sort of where we're coming from. So thank you and welcome. The only other issue I want to remind members is we are trying to adopt a more conversational style of questioning to our witnesses, to the people before us, and please try to keep your questions and comments pertinent to what we're discussing, and as much as you can, as briefly as you are able. First substantive item today then is item 5, the minutes of the last meeting, 26th of June. Just for accuracy, do members agree that these are a fair record of that meeting? Can I sign them off? Yeah. Thank you. Done. Okay, item 6. This is our first of 2 substantial items on the agenda today. This one is regarding progress on children's services and their improvement plan. We have various people in the audience. Can I ask Sally Hodges, the director, and Fiona, portfolio holder, if you wouldn't mind, we have places at the front here, name tags and everything. Thank you very much. This, of course, is an ongoing discussion, children's services, and I probably would be remiss if I didn't refer to the recent Ofsted report, which obviously I think I speak from everybody on the committee was worrying in that over the last couple of years things seem to have got worse across the county, although there is, of course, note in the report of improvements that have being recently made, but still a worrying time, and I suspect that you'll be picking up on that as part of the next comments. Please, we don't need, we've all been presented with the report, but I mean, if you want to give a brief outline, and sorry also to Janet, Jean, sorry, Assistant Director. Are you able just to give us a brief overview of the report that we hopefully have in front of us?
Thank you, Chair.
And sorry, could I ask you to use the microphone partly for the recording?
Thank you, Chair. It's my understanding that there are 2 reports before you today. One is the resume report. One is the improvement plan, which colleagues have had over time. And now, of course, you will all have had access to the Ofsted report. A few processy things to bring scrutiny up to speed with. The Ofsted report has now been published. We have to submit our action plan against the recommendations of the Ofsted report. to them, and they will be back to visit us in September. There will be, after that, a number of monitoring visits, which are, if you like, mini inspections where they come for a couple of days and they look again to see what progress has been made. We expect the first of those to be in the early part of next year. In our conversations with Ofsted, they have and they do understand that we also have a substantial improvement plan, and they recognise the need for us to be able to make sure that we manage both the plans together, so we don't have a whole process of managing an Ofsted improvement plan and a whole other process of managing a wider improvement plan. Otherwise, officers are spending all their time going to improvement board meetings and not at the front door on the front of the service trying to improve things. I think there is an absolute synergy between the Ofsted comments and the improvement plan and the issues that we've already identified in the last few months. And indeed, the Ofsted report refers to that we know our service very well, we know where our weaknesses are. And they are very clear in their report that the plans that we have are the right plans. We need to carrying on with the right plans, and in due course improvements will be seen. The Commissioner has 6 particular points that he raises as part of the overall improvement plan, and colleagues will be aware that he is in the building every week. He meets everybody, he meets staff, he meets teams, he meets myself, he meets whoever he wants in order to be able to satisfy himself about what's happening on his priorities. And then monthly there is the improvement board, and we talk through issues more generally and substantially around the improvement board table, which is a multi-agency meeting. I think fair to say we recognise our 2 key challenge areas financially and in every other way are about staffing being the first one, and the recruitment of permanent staff to our organisation, which remains problematic for us. And the second issue is that of placements of children, which are costly and not always appropriate, and the Ofsted report clearly identified that. We knew that when Ofsted came. You might not be aware that when Ofsted arrive, the first thing they do is to meet the director and the chief executive and the senior team, and we have to make a presentation to them about what we think the state of the department is. It's very brief, to the point, punchy, succinct. We told them, and at the end of the inspection they were able to say that absolutely we knew what it was. What we had said at the beginning was exactly what they found, and therefore they recognised that we understood ourselves, and that's kind of halfway towards making the improvements. So our 2 biggest challenges then are staffing. We still struggle to recruit, not so much recruit, but retain good quality staff for all the reasons that have been rehearsed here in the past. We're going to struggle a bit more, I think, for a short-term period of time. Now the Ofsted report has been made public, because it makes us, we're going to have to work very hard at becoming an attractive organisation to work for. As a consequence of that. That's not to say some people are not put off by that kind of thing. It's a bit like, do you want to be an emergency doctor? Do you want to go in the emergency room because it's an emergency? And some people are attracted to that kind of work. And ditto, we're running into the trust now, so in itself that also will be a plus when it comes to recruitment strategies, but we just need to get the timing of that right, because we don't have a final and fixed date for when that will go live. We're working with colleagues in HR. We now have a specialist recruitment advisor for us, helping us pull together our campaign so that we can do some timing around what we want to say and when we want to say it, to try and get more permanent staff into the service. But it is an uphill struggle. In terms of placements, the Ofsted report, and indeed our own report, refers to our lack of internal sufficiency, mostly around the fostering area. We are endeavouring to uplift our fostering campaigns as much as we can. We have a new assistant director joining us in September, very experienced person from other authorities and also from the independent sector, who will give us that internal and external market view so we can consider how quickly we can move on improving our overall sufficiency of placements for our young people. That will help us in terms of expense, but also in terms of those youngsters that we have in unsuitable placements at the moment. So essentially, Chair, that's where we are. The rest of the detail is in all the reports that people have.
Thank you. You mentioned staffing, recruitment and retention of staff, which is clearly something this committee has been not only concerned about previously, but we have passed on recommendations to Cabinet around that, and I suspect that that will form part of the discussion. I totally understand the concept that some social workers would want to come to a challenging environment for their career development. You mentioned the fact that moving towards trusts might help, in fact, help that, make it more attractive for people. I'd be interested to sort of getting an understanding of why that might be. And is it not the case that we are currently recruiting new social workers, but at a lesser rate than they're leaving? Would that be a fair assumption?
If I can answer those in reverse order, yes, at the moment we are losing staff. We try very hard not to. We try to induce them to stay. We make substantial offers of support to people in order that they do stay. But what I will say is also that we are choosing who we encourage to stay, and we are choosing not to be very upset with some staff who might choose to leave that we don't think are as good as they might be. So we have to be very clear that we are targeting good quality staff to do the job here. If they are not of good quality, we will not improve the quality of our basic social work. If we don't improve the quality of our basic social work, we will continue to have the rise of children coming into the care system. So it's a whole system challenge. I can't remember your first question, sorry, Chair.
You seem to imply the trust would help with recruitment.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because although, as the Minister himself said in Parliament in response to questions about our serious case reviews, when you look at some trusts, they have succeeded and done really well, even when they've taken 78% of the existing staff across with them. And we sincerely hope that will be the case here. But people are attracted to an alternative model of delivery where they believe that the flexibility that the organisation will have to change how it works and what it does and how it supports staff is greater in a children's trust than it is in a local authority. And generally speaking, that is the case. So, for example, if the trust wanted to change how it's delivering things, not what it's delivering, but the way it does it or the way it's structured or whatever it chooses to do or its training arrangements or whatever, it can do it very quickly as long as its board agrees. In a local authority, there are a significant number of processes and challenges that need to be gone through in order for that to be able to be affected. So there is a difference and flexibility in that. And generally, people are attracted to working to trust. And we need to capitalise on that as quickly as we can. But as I say, it's a timing thing. So there's no good in us making a lot of noise about that now because it's potentially 9 months, 10 months away before the trust goes live and we'll lose that momentum. So we need to get the timing right so we're going with it as in this is the date the trust will go live, come and join us because etc, etc.
Thank you. I'm interested that you seem to be saying that the trust wouldn't suffer from some of the almost bureaucracy that a local authority does. I think that's probably something we all need to try to get and understand. I've got Victoria, Jonathan and Michael and Richard as well. Before I do, sorry, I don't want to put you on the spot, Fiona, but given that we did send a report on recruitment and retention to Cabinet, I just wondered if you had anything to add.
I think that our DCS, Sally, has given you a very good overview of the situation that we're in. The recruitment and retention, I've kept an eye on all the time, and I do agree with everything that is happening. We are losing people more than we're gaining people, but we don't want to employ anybody. We want really good quality staff, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to improve our service. But as she said, when the Ofsted inspectors were in the building, they interviewed all of us at length, and they were happy that the leadership team that is here now is going to be able to take this forward. So just hopefully that will give you some reassurance for the future that the plans that we have in place now and our knowledge of how the service is, they were very impressed by.
Okay, thank you. Victoria, first of all.
Right, so on the issue of recruitment, I know there's an absolute willingness from the leadership team to solve that issue, because until we do, we can't deliver a robust and resilient children's service. But do you have the tools available that you need to deliver the recruitment that we need? Do you have the backing of the senior leadership team at the council, and in that I mean the commissioners and the chief executive? Do you and the Children's Commissioner have that backing to deliver what you need to do that recruitment? Because unless you do, then this is a wish list on paper that I know you sincerely wish for, but if it's something that we can't achieve, then we need to be having a very different and direct conversation.
Thank you. In terms of the tools to do the job, we now have a recruitment specialist, Michelle, who has joined us recently, whose sole focus is on recruiting social workers. She is supporting us in the recruitment of permanent staff, but also in recruitment of good quality agency staff, because, as you know, sometimes we have to take agency staff to fill some of the gaps and do the work. We do have the backing of SLT and indeed the commissioners. Everybody recognises the importance of getting the staff base right. And Malcolm in particular has been driving this absolutely through the improvement board. It's one of the things that he raises at every board. Where are we with recruitment? What are we doing about it? How are we getting on with it, etc., etc. And in fact, we've had our performance meeting this morning before scrutiny today, and a lot of that conversation has been about recruitment. Where are we? What are we doing? When's the next ad going out? How can we do it? What do we do about making sure that our managers that are struggling are getting the support? How are we doing about managing out those people that aren't good enough? What are we doing about getting some replacements for them? So we are constantly dealing with this virtually. Well, I don't deal with it daily. Others deal with it daily. I deal with it every other day, really, and Jean's all over it every day. So it is a constant thing for us.
But I think the question is that I don't doubt that. I absolutely know that desire is there. But do we have the package for the social workers? Do we have the right package to attract them? Or is this us just slogging with what we've already got? That's really what I want to know.
I suppose my answer is it's a bit mixed. We have a better package for social workers now because the new target operating model, as you know, changes the shape of the service, changes the ratio of staff to managers, and that will make a difference. Our caseloads have come down, and they are within industry average. We've got a few outliers, both ends, you know, some with less for different reasons, some with more for different reasons, but our caseload average is within what I would say industry norms. We've got the new performance AD who's pulling together the new additional training for our staff. We're rolling out the new team manager training in particular shortly, because that's a cohort we need to make sure is strong. We do struggle with issues around competitive salaries. We're picking up at the moment that all our neighbouring authorities are going to up their agency rate as we understand it, but we're doing a bit more to find out whether that's true or not, or whether the agencies are playing a game about just telling us everybody else is paying more, because we know that's what happens and you have to manage that market. So we do have some challenges, yes, around whether or not we are competitive in many senses. But our issue is what it is about us that makes us a place to come and work. So we're trying to address, if you like, the work-based issues around the management, the support, the caseload, the supervision, and the access to training, which is, in our experience, is what attracts people more than anything else.
Okay, thank you. I mean, it's interesting. We've been talking about the package offered to potential social workers for some time, and I guess the proof is in the pudding, but thus far, despite assurances in the past, it doesn't seem to have had the desired effects. But that's just a comment from my point. Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I have to say that I'm extremely disappointed in what I'm hearing and what I've read in these papers today. The fact being is that we actually gave the Cabinet and the administration a preview of the work on the paper that we did on the retention and recruitment of social workers way back November, December of last year. And the reason, Chair, why I'm disappointed is that we don't seem to have had any progress on that. In fact, as it seems now, is that we're going backwards because we have less social workers than what we've attracted. We have only had apparently 3 new admin staff taken on to support the social workers in their duty. And Chair, one of the things that came out of the social worker open day that we had was the lack of having their annual reviews, and that those reviews hadn't taken place. And in fact, when people were on sick or on maternity leave, they hadn't been given the space and the time to have those reviews when they returned, because apparently they were only in a certain time scale. And what concerns me more is the fact that we are allowing social workers to leave, and as what the DCS has just said, that may not be up to scratch. However, if we're not training them and we're not doing their annual assessments to identify what areas they need training and improvement on, how can they improve? So we encourage them to leave instead of encouraging them to stay and give that important training that we've now, if you like, we've admitted to. We've found out that these social workers are a little bit below par, in their own words. So instead of letting them go, why aren't we offering them in-house training to fill those gaps of where they're not performing their well in that particular area? And likewise, Chair, is that, you know, one of the main things on the report was to recruit a dedicated administration team to take a lot of the day-to-day mundane operations that social workers take on, to relieve the social workers to do the job that they're there to do. But once again, we're failing in you know, recruiting administration teams. You know, I can understand social workers, Chair, because of the level of their qualifications and their experience required. But, you know, and I won't belittle administration teams at all in any way here, but they're not that highly experienced with the social workers training that they can't do that job and making those appointments and those phone calls, etc., that the social workers are having to do at the moment. So the question I'd like to ask is why we're still finding the need to not encourage social workers to stay because we're not giving them the training, and the other question is have we get in their annual assessments? Are they all being done on time every year so we can identify areas within the existing social workers that we have working here to improve and to give them the additional training for them to do the job properly? So basically, are we giving the social workers the tools to do their job and to improve?
And can I just ask a supplementary to that before you answer? We know there have been financial cuts in training for social workers, albeit possibly not some of the most fundamental parts of their training. But does that have an impact as well?
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Do you want me to answer? Yeah.
Cecile.
Because I think on page 26 of your report, you touch on social working pay, so it might be easier for you after Councillor Aikins to see if you can elaborate on the improvement you have done on the worker pay, because you say that every worker would be paid 31,500. So maybe it's a good little paragraph, but I would like a bit more what you are doing for the others to see if Jonathan Aitken, Councillor Aikins, has reason to be concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. A number of issues. The PDRP in particular, we are at the moment running
PDRP?
Oh, the Performance Development and Review Plan. The annual review, sorry, it's a local anachronism. We are running at the same rate as most other departments in the county about our compliance rate in respect of that, and there's been a big push on that recently in order to get more of them done completed by the end of the 31st of July, which was the cut-off date for count. So we are, whilst we're not running anywhere near 100%, we are not out of step with other elements of the organisation insofar as the amount and the time that we take to do some of these things. I absolutely share Councillor's view about the need to train staff. And can give some assurance that we have been doing quite significant training for our staff, particularly around the signs of safety, which is our operating model, which we are rolling out throughout the whole organisation, which is a massive operating tool which helps social workers in their thinking and their understanding and how they do assessments and how they collate their information, all the rest of it. And that is rolling out right across the organisation. The Ofsted report clearly makes reference to that. What that says is it's bigger and better in some places than it is in others, and we recognise that, so we know where we need to be concentrating our efforts. In terms of the weaker staff, we do provide what training and support we can with our staff that we think have potential. And indeed, we were talking about some of that this morning. We recognise, identify those staff that we think have the potential to develop. What I will not have, though, is those staff where we don't think they have that potential and where their practice is not safe. We cannot afford to keep those staff in our organisation. So if we think a person is capable of improving, then they will be on what is called a capability plan, which is about how we improve and support them to become better workers in whatever area it is. But if we don't think that's working, then we have to take a decision. In terms of the admin staff, we are recruiting a significant number of additional admin posts. We've been doing that for a number of, certainly in recent weeks. We were talking this morning about how many additional CVs we've had come across to help us, because we do absolutely recognise that having admin support in each team will release some social work time to be able to concentrate on the social work task. In respect of pay, I think our greater challenge is that of the career structure. We're not in a position at the moment to be able to offer a career path through our service. That is something that we're in discussions about, what that will look like, what the ultimate cost of that will be, and where that funding may or may not come from in due course. But we do recognise that having a career pathway through the organisation would make a difference.
Okay, thank you. Michael and... Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Again, so I understand what you're saying. I understand you're saying that we've got some staff that are below the par, which are unsafe. So I've got a couple of questions. The first one is if they are unsafe, why aren't we looking at terminating their contracts then? Because that is putting this, county at risk, or the children of this county at risk. That's the first part. The second part is, I appreciate what you're saying is that I do know that you're transferring other admin teams in to bulk up the staff that you've already got. So, and it's good that you're dressing up, but I'd like you to be a little bit more informative with us. I'd like you to be a bit more descriptive with us, rather than just say, well, we're getting these teams coming in and they're doing this. I want to know what impact that this is happening. If we're taking more and we're drafting in more admin team to support the social workers, what I would like, because it was part of my report, what I would like to know is them coming in, how much time have they saved from social workers doing those duties which they can spend more time on doing what they're paid to do? So what is the impact of it? How much more time have we released? It could be a percentage-wise. It could be say that they're 10% more efficient as a social worker, or 20%, or even 5%. That's what I want to know, is by putting an admin team in place, what is it doing on the actual overall, if you like, the efficiency of social workers carrying out their duties within this county?
In terms of efficiency, I think the issue is... No, I'll go back to the first question about those staff that are not suitable. And I think that's why we are where we are at the moment with our numbers, because we actually have been terminating the contracts of those staff that we think are not good enough. And they are mainly agency staff, I have to say, not our permanent staff. We are not recruiting permanent staff that aren't good enough. This is mainly agency staff who come to us through a recruitment process, and then when they get to us, what they say they can do and what they can actually do turn out to be quite different things, and we rapidly then would terminate those contracts. And that's what we do. So I need to give you that assurance that when we come across someone whose practice is unsafe, we would terminate their contract straight away. In terms of the efficiency, I think one of the challenges is it'd be really difficult for me to give you a percentage to say all our social workers will be 10% more efficient if we had an administrator in each team. What I will say is that having an administrator in each team allows a lot of the other processes that you've been talking about to be much slicker and quicker. So, for example, the PAD process and how we administer all of that can be much slicker and quicker. Some things around how we get the CVs through and some of the arrangements around the staffing and the recruitment can be much slicker and quicker. Some of the things that need to go into the system, the IT system, will be slicker and quicker because there is administrative support. So we're trying to improve, one of the mantras we've said all the way along through this is to create the conditions for good practice to thrive. And having that additional admin support will help us with that, with the conditions in which people then can get on with their job better than they have done so far. But I think it'd be really difficult to add a percentage. Sorry, Jean.
But just actually, the additional business support will support the team managers. We're making smaller teams so that one team manager has less social workers to be responsible for, so that there are much clearer lines of accountability, so that each team manager is responsible for managing the casework in a limited number of children's cases, around about 120, something like that. And the business support actually will be most helpful to those managers who are otherwise pulled away doing basic administrative tasks and are not able to spend the time they need to spend supervising their social workers, getting a real sense of what's happening in individual children's lives. That's how social work works. It's all based on relationships and knowledge and understanding. So it's really about giving the team managers more capacity to more safely manage the children for whom they are responsible in their teams. The issue about, yes, we have been much more robust, necessarily so, in terms of letting agency staff go who are doing us, the organisation, a disservice, and actually the children and families that they've been serving a disservice. That does then compound the issue of more unallocated cases, because when we let an agency person go, an agency social worker go, we then have their cases to reallocate. So that's a sort of constant tension, if you like. So we're constantly looking to replace people. And we're yet to reach steady state. That's what we're aiming for. And some of the things that Sally's talked about, reviewing the career structure so that we become, what we need to do is create what they call a compelling offer, so that we have everything right. We guarantee people, it's not all about money, but we guarantee people manageable caseloads, good supervision, the right level of training, the culture of an organisation which is about what interests social workers, which is having time to make relationships with children and families and do proper social work interventions, not just monitoring, not just policing families, but actually getting engaged and working with them. That's what gives job satisfaction. But of course, people have got their mortgages to pay, their bills to pay, and we have to compete with other authorities in the region, so we have to get it all right. We've got to get the conditions right, but we do also have to get the salary and the career structure right, so that we build a sustainable workforce. So somebody comes here as a newly qualified social worker, we invest in them, we train them, we support them, and they stay right the way through up until team manager and beyond. That's how you create permanent, stable workforce that delivers the level of service which is at least good in Ofsted terms. That's how you eventually make those improvements. But you do have to get the building blocks in place.
Can I just add one thing which you may be concerned about, that over the August bank holiday weekend, the building is going to be restructured, so the 200 workstations that we have to put in place for the children's service will be allocated in an area together so that they can all sit and work in one area together, and this will take place over the August bank holiday weekend, so that they will be able to converse with their colleagues more easily.
Chair, if I may just finally, on one final point on this one, I understand that when you said that you're transferring admin support staff in, and you're drawing them from other areas of the organisation.
And we're recruiting new staff.
Well, you've recruited 3 new staff, but you've also said that provide us with the number then, please?
Okay, well, we will absolutely do that. So
Well, do you not have that number with you?
I don't have that number with me, but we have...
But aren't you in charge of the department? So you're telling us that you've recruited staff, but you're not telling us how many you've recruited.
I'd be guessing,
I understand you haven't got that information now, but we would like it. The other question is that it has been inferred that you are drawing some admin teams from other areas to work on this project. Are those admin teams permanent, or are they going to go back to where they came from? No.
In the new structure of the department, we have made clear that we need additional admin staff to support the work of the Children's Social Care Department, and they are new posts as part of the TOM operating model. So they are new posts, they are more admin posts, and we are recruiting to them at the moment. I think the number is in excess of 30, but I will confirm that absolutely for you.
Rather than dwell on this point, it's a valid point from Jonathan, but perhaps you could just provide us with that information that might answer the questions. Could I, before I bring Michael in, can I very quickly go on to something you spoke about, terminating the contracts of unsafe agency staff? Just a sort of industry-wide question. What happens to those staff? Does the agency have some sort of responsibility to either ensure that they are brought back up to speed, or are they free to go and work in Warwickshire, Leicestershire, Nottinghamshire, wherever?
We would provide feedback to the agency about the quality of that staff person, and if we believe that their behaviour is genuinely so unsafe as they should not be able to practice, then we would refer them to HCPC, which is the arbitrary body who decides whether or not a social worker remains registered.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Michael, you've been very patient.
Thank you. The Ofsted report, which we're all familiar with, makes for very sad and depressing reading. I think you might sum it up as being 10% positive in terms of progress made and 90% critical. Unfortunately, I've been on this council for far too many years, and some colleagues would agree with that. However, my memories go back to 2012-13, and you could have written this report, and probably a similar report was written 7 or 8 years ago, highly critical of our children's services. We had government intervention. We had an improvement board. I think Christine Davis was in, and it cost the council £62 million to achieve a status which was just about passable. And here we are again. It's like déjà vu all over again. It's as though 6 or 7 years later, we in Northampton County Council Children's Services appear to have made zero progress, and according to this report, we've gone backwards. Now, that's not a legacy I think many people could be proud of. We as councillors are scratching our heads as to why this has come about. We do ask ourselves questions about whether there is possibly an endemic cultural problem in the directory. And the reason I say that is that directors of services have come and gone over these years, highly paid people. We've been made a lot of promises, as you're promising now, improvement, better tomorrow, heard it all before. And yet, we come back to the point that these unsolved, unresolved problems are confronting us time and time again. And let me be specific. If I can refer you to page 8 of the the Ofsted report, paragraph 42, fostering services. The fostering service is not able to provide a sufficient number of foster placements, and crucially, vacancies in significant posts have made service development difficult. Vacancies in significant posts have made service development difficult. Mr. Chairman, I fail to understand, having identified the importance, which we're all signed up to, of recruiting more foster parents as the best solution for our children who are in danger or under menace of any sort. Why, having established a priority, have we got a report here telling us that there are vacancies in significant posts which have made service development difficult? Why has this not been made a top priority above everything else to recruit competent officers to address the problem of a shortage of people who could, foster parents in county in particular, who could help resolve this problem? And it's no good wringing our hands and saying, well, we've been here before. We have been here before, but we've made no progress. And if this was a private company and we had a report like this, I can tell you what would happen. But we're not. We're in the public sector, and life is slightly different. But it does not absolve anybody from the fact that we have underperformed in this area. I see no sign of any progress. I think Mrs. Hodges said there was going to be another director joining us shortly, specifically tasked with something like this. It does beg the question, why have these things not been addressed years ago? Why have we made no progress? And what confidence can we have that the promises you're making now will be any more valid than promises made before?
Two things. I can make no comment about the history. I have been brought here to try and effect improvement, and that is my function. And Jean the same. So we've been here a relatively short period of time, but our purpose is to try and effect some of the improvements that clearly yourselves as members and certainly us as officers want to see happen. In terms of the fostering service in particular, yes, I would support what you're saying about our need to drive our internal resource substantially, which is why we are, and it talks here about significant posts have made development difficult, which is why we've got the new person coming to support us in driving this forward. We absolutely recognise that our net gain of foster carers is not anywhere near the level that we want it to be, and we will be launching, and in fact we've got a specialist joining us in the next couple of weeks to try and relaunch our fostering, internal fostering arrangements, but also to consider whether there might be any other options about how we can gain additional fostering resources for us. I would, however, like to make comment that I don't agree with Councillor's view that 90% of this is negative and 10% of it is good. The Ofsted report, I think when we read through it, there are a substantial number of areas in here where there is comment about services that are at the very least reasonable. But I do agree that overall inadequate is not a place that we want to be in, nor indeed an authority of this size should be in.
Okay, thank you. You follow up?
You've not disagreed with anything in the Ofsted report?
No, I don't disagree with the content. Absolutely, I do, yes. I believe, with the exception of one comment that we asked them if they would consider changing, which they didn't. But no, I absolutely accept what they're saying in the Ofsted report.
You accept that 2 of the 3 categories are inadequate?
Yes, I do.
As low as we can get?
Yes, I do.
The conclusion from that is that we have made virtually no progress, certainly since October when Ofsted worked with us and identified problems. And all we've got, in the sense of looking forward, are some aspirations and some new plans and new people coming on board. But in terms of achievements, when looking back at the recent past 2 or 3 years, we've in effect probably gone backwards.
I think if you look at the report itself, it talks about significant things which have improved. It talks about improvements at the MASH. It talks about management oversight being more identified. It talks about caseloads being reduced. It talks about supervision being provided, assessments within timescales, etc., etc. So there are substantial elements in here which report services which are of good enough standard. The virtual school, the children with disabilities team, and many of our care-related services. But what it does quite rightly do is identify those areas where we do not meet a required standard, and we absolutely accept that we don't meet a required standard in some of those areas.
Okay, thank you. I've got to say I understand the frustration of the councillor. I mean, one of the highlights for me on the front page of the report is the quality of support for vulnerable people in Northamptonshire has declined since the last full inspection 2016. So I totally understand where you're coming from. But yes, we need to, if we can, move forward. I have a list of speakers waiting. Richard, who's been waiting very patiently, and then I've also got Cecile, Chris, and Jonah, Jill, and Victoria again, who's just left. Richard.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Director. You're obviously somebody that likes the emergency room from your initial analogy on what people, and I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that somebody of your experience is willing to come in here and serve the people of Northamptonshire. So thank you and your staff for their service. And also, you know, you are right. On page 1, I looked with great interest and compliments on, the MASH and the completion of timely the information sharing is done in a timely way. And as a result, the majority of children receive the right level of service. Look at 4, when safeguarding concerns are identified, decisions are made promptly. 5, emergency team are effective and ensure that people are kept safe. So there is some good areas of work. But when you go through the what needs improved, I did a sort of a word check to try and get a flavour of exactly what Ofsted are talking about. And at the top, the most common word that came up was the word, we don't intervene and respond quick enough. That came up 5 times. And then we had, believe it or not, planning and strategic development was second. There were 4 mentions of failures and concerns in that areas. And then we go down to quality of the work, timeliness of the work, and then recognition and identification of risk. So for me, it seems to be that is, I think Max Caller coined the phrase, doing the boring well. It doesn't appear that we're doing the basics well. One of the statements you made in your testimony was that caseloads are within industry averages. So we then reflect to why isn't the boring being done well? Why aren't the basics being done well? And there was some sort of admission with regard to the quality of staff. But before I sort of ask my question for you is I want to acknowledge that we must have some absolutely excellent staff in our organisation that are doing a great job, but there is definitely a problem with something dragging down their performance and sort of casting a shadow over the way we work operationally. And so the balance is between, are our protocols, policies and working practices right? And are we doing the boring well? If those 2 things are in line, then we get by default a good service. So the question is this. It is a strategic one, bearing in mind the great challenges and the complexity of your area of business. Going through the improvement plan, it is just mind-boggling about how complex it is. An honest assessment, because this is about the people and the children of our county. Can we turn this around? We have unitary in about 18 months' time, 16 months' time, whatever it is, and we're moving towards a trust. I accept that, but can we make those improvements realistically from your experience in time? And if not, where do we go from here?
Thank you for your comments and your question. And yes, you're right, it is an extraordinarily complex issue. I mean, I think one of the things that the Ofsted report does reflect is that they recognise that this is a whole system shift. And that in the past, perhaps where things have gone wrong here, I haven't been here, as you know, but one of the things they have said is that there have been kind of piecemeal approaches to, little bits of bites here, there and everywhere, trying to deal with matters, whereas what we're trying to do is effect a whole system change to how we do our business. Hence the TOM, the operating model, and the complete shift in the relationship of managers to practitioners to get better supervision, better grip on cases, and all those kind of, if you like, managerial approaches. In terms of the strategic development, there is that element around it, but also we have taken some very big decisions around, for example, the development of adolescent service, because we recognise through our own work, and the Ofsted supports us, that we need to consider what our approach is for our young people in the authority. So we bear the brunt, if you like, or we deal with those young people who are at the very serious end of challenges and difficulties. And we are working with our colleagues across a number of agencies to try and get upstream of some of that, so we support these youngsters before they get anywhere near the statutory functions. So I think in terms of our strategy, we're clear what we're trying to achieve in improving our workforce, in dealing with our young people more appropriately, and in making our management arrangements stronger so that we can support those workers that we want. How long do these things take to turn around? They take years. I would be absolutely wrong in saying to you this will happen in 6 months. It won't. If you look at authorities across the country, it takes 2 to 3 years at least to turn an inadequate authority around to anything like a good standard. Some can do it in a couple of years. Often that is to do with the formation of a children's trust, but often that is also to do with the children's trust with a significant improvement budget. But Northamptonshire Authority is not in that position to be able to do that. So we're trying to affect our improvement in a different set of circumstances.
Yeah, just a couple more points to build on your testimony there. So do you feel that the move to unitary will be a hindrance to this improvement over the years? Or do you feel that the creation of the trust will hopefully have a seamless move into a new authority. And the second question is you talked about partners. Are our partner agencies, this is not just a county council issue. This is about all statutory and voluntary agencies working together for a common cause to keep our children safe. Have we got the right buy-in and engagement from them? So first of all, is unitary, do you feel that's going to be a hindrance to the progress, and have we got the right buy-in from our partner agencies?
Thank you.
Can I just add to that, because I think, Richard, that's a fundamental question. We are told that the improvements that need to happen are so great it can't happen quickly, and therefore moving to the trust rather than splitting the services into two separate unitary areas is what's needed. I have to say there are some of us, myself included, that following this Ofsted report are now thinking actually maybe a complete new fresh start may be needed. So I'll be very interested to hear your response to that question.
In my professional view, moving to the trust here in Northampton is the right decision to have taken. And I don't think that the unitarisation will make any substantial difference to that, because the trust will cover both unitaries as it goes forward. The view we have to take is that the trust will be formed within the next 6 or 9 months. And there will be a lot of work that's needed to do to make sure that that is right and proper, and we will be working with the Children's Commissioner and the team from the DFE. My deputy, Sharon Muldoon, is taking the responsibility for developing the customer face, if you like, between the local authority, the county council and the trust throughout next year. In terms of the improvement journey, it's what I was saying right at the beginning of this conversation this morning, is that actually having a trust, I think, will allow some of these improvements to be taken forward quicker than they might otherwise have been, and certainly quicker than they would be if we were talking about having to spend another 12 months working out how to divide everything amongst two unitaries. That would just completely take the eye off the ball in terms of development and improvement. So in a sense, putting it into a children's trust might, and I'm probably making all kinds of sackable statements now, to be fair, but putting it in a children's trust puts it in a place where the improvements will continue regardless of all the activity that is going on about becoming two unitaries. Partner issues, we met, and interestingly, we had a safeguarding partnership meeting yesterday in which we were discussing the Ofsted report about how we as a set of partners need to be supporting each other to effect improvements. We are also looking at the recent police inspection report too, because they share similar issues, and absolute wholehearted agreement that as a collaborative of safeguarding statutory leads, there are issues that we need to be taking forward together, and these two inspection reports I think will help us shape how we're going to do some of that.
Thank you. Just one final point. I do think it is a brief one. It's really about the team management and the supervision.
Yeah.
In most public services where we are dealing with the spontaneous and the critical, that relationship between the supervisor and those actually operating in the field is really, really important. And we have to free up the supervisors so they can do their supervision. I think that will help us do the boring well. So I wish you best of luck with that and all your other work. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Director.
About that area in particular, the Ofsted report does report supervision happening. And we monitor how often supervision happens all the time. We have gone from a position in one area in particular of 38% in December compliance with supervision to 80-odd%. So we are definitely improving the rate of supervision. But also what we have done as part of the new team manager training is to do work with them about the quality of that supervision. So first of all, we have to get it happening. And we are working on the quality of that as well. So I absolutely understand the importance of that first line management supervision, and the concentration around the TOM about ratios, staffing and that kind of thing is all about making sure that those first line managers have manageable number of staff, manageable number of children within that staff group, and the opportunity to be able to provide support. That is what the TOM's about, and that's what the training's about.
Okay, thank you. I do not wish to curtail questioning or debate in any way at all, but I would ask people to be as brief as they possibly can. I still have a number of speakers. Cecile.
Yes. As councillor, we are not professional, and we are there to represent the people who voted for us. And we are there to make sure that the money they pay in tax is well spent. That is what I think my role, and notwithstanding the sadness of all those cases, in the last 10 years, there are between 900 and 1,100 children in care, or who are in it. Now, if we carry on like that, the numbers are quite stable. So do you have any prevention who could help those numbers to be reduced? How? Because I do think a child's become in care because the parents have done something for the child to be in care. So if we don't change the dialogue, if we don't have preventative measure, we will always be like that. And if you are a company, if you do not change and never give help before it happened, you are in a catch-22. So how, in your opinion, and you might not be able to do that, is the number of children in care we are comparative to other council an average? And if it's more, what do we do wrong? But also, what do you think we should concentrate to help those children not to come into care in the first place? Thank you.
Yes, you are right about the numbers of children in the care system. We are high, but not an outlier. But we are higher than where we want to be, there's no doubt about that. And we do recognise that also when children do come into care, we don't have, it comes back to what we were saying at the beginning, we don't have the sufficiency of resource to be able to make more judgments about where we might choose to place that child. And we've got 14% of children in care are using 40% of the budget for placement. So we have some children in the care system who are in very, very expensive placements, and that is because of their level of need and their challenging behaviour and all the kinds of things that you as councillors are aware of from your own constituents and cases that come across your desks too. I think that the Ofsted report certainly refers to many measures that have been removed from the local authority over a number of years in terms of targets and reductions, and the Ofsted inspectors made comment about that in their report. What we are trying to do to remedy some of that is we are seeking any external opportunity for funding that we can. For example, recently we believe we may be successful in some funding for the reinstatement of the family group conferencing arrangement. We are hopeful of that. Which will help us with some of these families in identifying further support for families in order to prevent the children coming into care. We have also recently set up a very challenging set of panel arrangements to look at those children who are in care and whether or not we can effect either a step down into an alternative placement or a quicker reunification home with additional support. We've started that process. Those panels meet weekly. There is also a very rigorous and robust panel which looks at those children where we are thinking of taking them families through care proceedings. I can report that the numbers of care proceedings that have been taken has drastically reduced in the last 6 months. So that is a good thing. Where we have not seen a reduction is children coming into us on an emergency basis. So we still have some challenges in the system, but we have got mechanisms in place now to try and manage some of these down better.
Can I add?
Yeah.
Just to add that our investment in the Signs of Safety practice framework, the Signs of Safety is a strengths and relationships-based model. So it, when it's worked properly, it requires social workers to work alongside families to build on their strengths, develop relationships, help them to look after their own children safely. One of the things that we hope is going to make the most impact on this is is an ambitious development of an entire integrated adolescent service. So we don't have an adolescent service at the moment. Within the next 6 months we will have an integrated adolescent service. So that's it'll be multidisciplinary, multi-agency, delivering out in the communities, a hub and spoke type arrangement, some of those young people that are coming into care later in life, the 15 to 17-year-old, actually, because of homelessness and drugs and gangs and all those sorts of issues, that's our target group, so that we can not only prevent them from coming into care but actually achieve better outcomes for them, and address some of their issues, prevent their situations from deteriorating, and support them better in the communities. And that will, we hope that will have a knock-on effect in their communities as well, because it's a national issue, it's not a Northamptonshire issue, serious youth violence and gangs and contextual safeguarding and all those sorts of things. So we're working really hard, and that is an ambitious programme that we are determined to deliver, and that will have an impact.
That programme is also working through the Office of the Police Crime Commissioners, yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Particularly interested to hear about the proposed adolescent service. Presumably that will go to, some report will go to Cabinet. Be interested to explore if Scrutiny can in any way help the sort of inform the process around that. I've got several speakers: Chris, Anjona, Jill, Victoria and Jonathan again. Chris.
Thank you, Chair. So I've got a number of questions. No doubt you'll stop me when you think I've spoken too long, Chair.
Too long.
The first response team, which is page 19, I think, of the well, depends which page numbering you're looking at. Anyway, so we hear that the MASH has cleared is clearing their backlog, and this is now putting pressure on the first response team. So I just wanted to refer to this stability in teams chart, which is really illuminating, because that would appear to indicate that in the first response team we have a very high number of agency workers and at least one of them a very high number of vacancies. And whilst we don't have the absolute numbers relating to each bar, it would appear that it could be that across our 5 first response teams we may have as few as 3 permanent members of staff, which strikes me as worrying. What impact is that having on the work that the first response team does, and if the impact is adverse, how are we addressing that, please?
Undoubtedly Jean will have more to say about this than I do, but yes, I agree with you absolutely that FRT is the team where we have significant concerns about our staffing. It is the area where we have the highest percentage of agency staff. It is the area where we have some concerns about quality, and it's the area that Ofsted raised where we had some issues around quality of decision making. We do have an opportunity using additional funds that might be coming our way through the business rate retention in order to be able to do something about that, and we're working with our colleagues in HR to try and find a resolution as we go forward. But we are challenged with FRT at the moment. That is our highest on our worry list. Is there anything you want to add?
Well, just to say, there's no doubt, in whatever area of the service, a permanent staff group is by far the best, and that is what we want to achieve without a shadow of a doubt. Agency should only ever be used for covering maternity leave, covering unexpected absences. We should never be relying. No authority wants to be in that situation. And it's a perfect storm. It's the place with the highest agency. It's the place with the highest caseload. It's the least attractive place to work in some ways. So that's absolutely at the forefront of our consideration. What part of it is making sure that the work that goes into FRT is the right work. So all of this is about good decision making, making sure that nothing goes into the front door that doesn't need to be in the front door, that we divert work effectively and make the right decisions for children, so children get the right service at the right time. And so we're working hard to do that. You'll hear, and there's comment in the Ofsted report about consistency of decision making and the consistency of application of thresholds. That's all in that front door. That's work in progress. But we are confident that because of the things that we're putting in place, that in a few months' time, the caseload situation and the volume of work in the front door will have been addressed. I think that is going to remain an area where it's going to be problematic in terms of recruitment, and but the responses that Sally gave earlier about all the things that we need to do absolutely do apply at the front door. And I just wanted to give some reassurance. I think you asked a question about whether it's doable. Yeah, these situations are absolutely doable. You know, that my experience latterly has been working in authorities that have been in intervention, and I've been part of improvement teams. I've worked in big counties, bigger than Northamptonshire, as well as small authorities. And of those authorities, one of the large counties is now just recently been judged outstanding. The most recent inspection was good, and the 3 unitary authorities that I worked in, they've all achieved good. You know, it's a journey. It's a 3 to 5 year journey. I understand the frustration for Northamptonshire because it feels like you've been on a journey already for 5 years, you know, and I completely accept that. There are some considerable legacy issues that we do have to address as part of the improvement from this point onwards. We can't answer for what went on in the past, but we would want you to take some reassurance that we're experienced and we've trodden these paths before in other places, so we know that it's doable with the right measures in place.
Thank you, Chair. If I could move on to supervision, and it was touched on earlier, the improvement. We're now in a sort of a range between 67% and 90%, I think it is, of staff receiving supervision or have received supervision. Is it reasonable to expect that we would get to 100% across all teams, or is there always going to be a small percentage just because of churn, just because of people waiting to receive their next supervision, that you'll never quite get to 100%? How does that?
I'm always suspicious of 100% in anything, because there's always, you know, so actually that is something that causes me to scrutinise closely. So, you know, there'll always be people on, it's the way that we capture the data. So there'll always be people who've been off sick, have missed their supervision, or been on holiday, have missed their supervision, on maternity leave, they've been in court. So that, you know, we doubt very much that we'd ever be able to show 100%. But the important thing is in supervision, as well as in other areas of performance, that we look at the exceptions and we understand why. So we don't just accept that 90% or 85%, 90% is good enough. We look at the exceptions, we see who hasn't had their supervision, and we reassure ourselves that those reasons for people not getting supervision are legitimate. They've been on holiday, they've been in court, they've been off sick. Same as when we check the exceptions in terms of children being visited or children without plans. You know, it's a false, you can be falsely reassured by just looking at the data alone, and we take great care in our weekly performance clinics to make sure that we understand you know, what's happening to children behind the data. So we always look at the exceptions and seek to understand why some things haven't been happening. Otherwise, you could just accept, you know, we've met the target, that's good enough, but we don't take that view.
So 100% unlikely, get the point, but hopefully we'll see further improvement in those percentages that we've seen.
We will, but as Sally said earlier, what's crucially important, we don't just accept the issue about compliance. We're looking for good quality, and good quality, we will see the evidence of good quality supervision in terms of some of the outcomes for children. So less children coming into care, children being more safely supported at home, better outcomes generally, more children in foster care. That's what will tell us that our supervision is working, because we'll see better outcomes for children.
Exit interviews. What's the number one reason people are giving currently in their exit interviews as a reason for leaving the service?
There are a variety of reasons that people give to us. Interestingly, salary is very rarely the one that people raise. Sometimes it is a caseload number, for example. It depends on which area of service they've left from. Mostly it's personal reasons people give because they've come to us from elsewhere and they want to go back and work near a home. Sometimes it's about the office that they're working in they don't like for various reasons. So actually there is no one thing that we can point to and say if we fix that it will improve it all. There are a variety of reasons why people choose to leave us over time.
Still indulging me, Chair? Or...
Yep.
Okay, right. Just the other thing that we've got in front of us is that people have referred to a lot of this, the first document, the improvement plan, and nothing specific from anything in the improvement plan, but a general question around the measurement of impacts. And there's an awful lot of blues, which I think for impacts mean impact not measured. Now, is that because we will measure it, but we haven't got round to it yet? Or are there some things where we're actively not going to measure the impact of the actions that we're taking?
Some of this is because actually it's difficult at the moment to be able to measure the impact. So, for example, if we look at the strength and the leadership structure, we can do all of that. We can get all these people in post, but actually in terms of the outcomes, how soon we'll be able to tell that there is a difference, that will take some time further down the line. So some of this is about a process thing. We don't want to falsely say anything to the improvement board or indeed anyone else that would suggest there is improvement in outcomes when we're not actually in a position to be able to measure it yet. So it's trying to be as honest as we possibly can be with the position that we're in at the moment.
So we will be measuring impacts at some point. We're just not doing it yet.
On those areas where it's possible to measure an impact, then yes, we will. Yeah.
Right.
It's that sort of, you can have a target or an action which is about putting a strategy in place. You can write the strategy. Whether or not it has any impact in terms of its implementation is something that remains to be seen. So it's making sure, as Sally said, that we're transparent about the impact of actions that we're taking.
Can I have one final question, Chair? Would that be all right? Well, it might not be. Better not then, because it's not a little.
Can I ask one thing? You mentioned in impact interviews from Councillor Stamber's point, the various things. You didn't mention staff morale, and I appreciate that that's subjective and difficult to quantify and actually could affect any of those reasons you gave. But we know in the past staff morale has not been all that we would have liked it to have been. Could you give an assessment on whether you think that that's improved in the last 6 months or so?
Yes, I can, and yes, it has. I think it has. And Ofsted certainly in their feedback to us said that there was an improvement in staff morale certainly in the last few months. I've been doing a round of meetings with all staff in the last few weeks as it happens. Last one of those was yesterday, in order that staff can see the visibility of the senior leadership team. We have made it our policy with a small p to be visible. Jean and Sharon and I and the leaders, we get out there, we see people. Fiona and I have visits out to see staff. We talk to staff, we are open to staff. I've started to send out newsletters and in which it reflects good practice that's done with staff. We are very much more on the ball with when something comes to our attention that's a good piece of work or a compliment, we email straight away to say well done, etc., etc. So generally speaking, I would say from where I'm sitting, morale seems to be better, and Ofsted certainly felt that that was the case.
Okay, that's really pleasing to hear.
Yeah, it's actually on paragraph 61, sorry, Jean helpfully has pointed out, it's paragraph 61, page 10 of the Ofsted report.
Okay, and Jonah, you've been waiting patiently, I apologise.
Thank you, Chair. With most of the reports that have come out, this Ofsted, the previous Ofsted, some of the themes are the same, and about the stability, sustainability and sufficiency, somewhat about staff, but other issues as well in terms of placements and that kind of thing. I was really interested to hear about what Jean was saying relating to the compelling offer. In order to recruit staff, we have to have this compelling offer. And given that when I've looked at other authorities and their kind of pitch to experienced social workers, their neighbouring authorities use things like saying, you're going to get a desk and a parking space. So the bar is low, and there are things that we can't, where we are, do very much about. Very, very pleased to hear Fiona, Councillor Baker, about the proposals to, over the bank holiday weekend, to place staff together, and I think that will have a good impact. However, when there are so many things we can't do relating to space and what we have to offer, we have to focus on the things that we can do. So you say that pay isn't coming up in exit interviews as a reason for leaving. And to be honest, that doesn't surprise me, because if issues relating to pay were significant, you would not come here in the first place because of our differential pay levels. So we aren't on national terms and conditions. We also have differential pay levels, and I was very interested also to read in your report about the review of social worker pay that you were doing. So it would be helpful to understand a little bit more about when you thought that would happen, how long a period of time that would be, because although Ofsted highlight increased staff morale in their report, issues relating to differential pay levels are a source of considerable disquiet within our staff body. And we have, in the situation we're in, it's quite a complex picture, and I accept that. And it's part of the reason why I welcome the review of social worker pay, because that does provide an opportunity to try and get it right, because there's quite a complex environment of pay. So things relating, so in terms of cabinet reports that have gone before, a lot of emphasis has been placed on in terms of increasing our sufficiency in terms of staff, about agency conversion. But within your report, you say that actually that's not had very much traction. And the other issue that has been raised in previous cabinet reports include things like overseas recruitment, which again has differential pay levels within there. And again, would this be dealt with in this review of social worker pay? And could you explain a little bit more about why you think that differential pay levels in place at the moment are an acceptable way to operate? Second question, last question.
Can I answer that one?
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, otherwise I won't. Yes. Sorry, Councillor, but that would be just to help me for clarity, really. I accept your comments about parking and space, and Councillor Baker is absolutely right that we're doing a piece of work at the moment about allocation. We're also looking about whether or not there are additional or different means by which we can allocate space, not just in this building but elsewhere, that would help with our social work recruitment for places that people actually want to work from. Interestingly enough, our Partners in Practice team that's with us at the moment think this is a wonderful building to work from. And that's an interesting and different perspective to that we often hear from other staff. The issue about social work pay is wrapped up in the career structure issue. That's the bottom line. When I came here, I was very clear, and I said in front of Scrutiny and others that actually we do have a bit of a mishmash at the moment of the way that we reward our staff. We have the market supplement, which we pay for those teams where we struggle to recruit. We do not have the money to give everyone a market supplement. We have focused it on those areas of most difficulty in terms of recruitment. But the career pathway will be the means by which we address these differences. Because I don't want us to be in a position of offering this for that and that for the other and this for something else. I want us to be very clear, this is the pay structure that you will tie into when you come and work here. It will reflect your level of experience, and it will give you an opportunity to move up over time. That will be the resolution to this problem. We don't have that confirmed or finalised yet because it will be costly, but that will be the way that these things will be remedied. In terms of agency conversions, we still have that available out there. We talk to staff, our managers talk to their staff all the time, those good agency staff, not the weak ones. Do you want to work here? This is how it will work, and try to persuade people to do that. Quite often, though, they are people that are coming to us quite a distance and they don't want to make a permanent commitment to have that distance. And in terms of international social workers, we have had our last cohort of international social workers and we will not be recruiting abroad anymore.
Thank you. I'll let you answer your next question, and then after that I've got Jill, Victoria, Jonathan and Graham. At the end of that, I will give committee the opportunity to collaborate on any final comments or recommendations they feel. So if you can please keep your questioning as brief as possible in the meanwhile.
So the next question is about the move to trust. And I think in terms of the move to unitary, I was certainly someone who could see advantages in that, and in terms of getting rid of the two-tier structure of local government and having local government departments who had a lot to do with each other in different authorities being able to seamlessly talk to one another and help make smooth decision-making for our constituents. However, if we do have the children's services in a trust, it's in a different authority. So one of the things I was most upset about in the Ofsted report was the documentation about children leaving care and not having accommodation. And if we're not in a unitary, that will continue where we don't have children's services and housing in the same authority. That continues to be an issue, and I also think that the way we perform, there's been a lot said about. It's not just about us, it's other statutory partners as well. They all have issues as well. It's also how people think about us. It's also about how our constituents think about us, how our public think about us. And I've certainly had concerns raised to me relating to the concept of going out to a trust being essentially less democratic control and that, as such, kind of like privatisation. So in terms of this authority, in 2015, and I know we've corresponded a little bit about this, this authority took a decision to go to next generation model. We set up all of these companies, that kind of thing. I've previously asked questions about why do we still retain the Children's First company, and certainly I have had questions from constituents saying, is the fact that we're actually branded as children's services is different, a reason why actually there is poor performance, particularly in relation to unregulated placements?
Thank you, Councillor. I think we have to accept we are where we are with decisions that have been made about the unitary status and the Children's Trust. It is a given. The Minister has decided and he's signed it all off, and we are going to move to a Children's Trust in the next 6 or 9 months. I think the issue about the relationship between the Children's Trust and the unitary authorities is going to be one that will have to be worked on over time, because you are right in the sense that the unitary authorities retain the statutory responsibility for all children's services, not just the education bits that actually will sit within the unitary. Those unitary authorities have to hold the trust to account for delivery. So it's simply a delivery model, but the responsibility for that sits with the authorities. So the two unitary authorities absolutely retain that duty and responsibility. They will have to have a statutory director to make sure that's fulfilled, and they will have to have a statutory lead member also to make sure there is political leadership of the children's agenda. But in terms of some of the service delivery issues, I've worked in both shires and in unitaries, and certainly the issue about housing in particular is one where unitaries and Mets have an advantage, because there is the greater understanding of the sharing of the responsibility of that. And I think that will come when the unitaries recognise that actually what happens, certainly in the housing world, has an absolute and direct bearing, not just on how the Trust can deliver its services, but on the cost, which actually the unitaries will have to bear. So this issue about it's not mine, it's yours, it's not mine, it's yours, will be overcome because actually it's a shared responsibility. So I think there are advantages in that.
Okay, thank you. Jill.
Thank you, Chairman. We have referred to the working party on the retention and recruitment of staffing, of social workers, and I was on that, and one of the major things that we recognised there was what you just said about the money isn't necessarily the only reason why people are either satisfied or dissatisfied with their position. And it was a lot of it down to where they are working. I'm really pleased to hear Fiona say that improvements are going to be made to this building to make it more comfortable or good working space for the staff. There was also the suggestion previously, and I presume that's still going on, of the locality hubs that were being set up, and I'd just like to know where we are with that, because obviously if they're out in wherever the few different areas, then you know, they aren't in this building, where some, as you said, some the staff don't like this type of environment, although you said one department does. It might be interesting to find out why they think it's good to work in and the others don't. I don't know whether we can go there. So that's the first thing. And also, a lot has been said about the target operating model. And I've heard previously that this was coming in August, which is just tomorrow. So I would just like to sort of get some understanding of does that involve physical changes of where people are, or the relationships between the departments and the supervisors and the staff? And, you know, it seems to be a long while coming, and I don't know whether it's sort of, right, okay, tomorrow we'll all move desks and we'll be in a new situation, or does this take time to bring in, and what sort of are the implications of that target operating model?
I'll start, and then I'll hand the baton to Jean to pick up some of the things about the Tom, if you don't mind. In terms of the improvements in this building, yes, things will be better. But I think it would be folly to say that all the difficulties will be resolved. We are looking, as I said earlier, at options where we may be able to locate some staff elsewhere too, but we need to be mindful of any particular or likely additional cost in that, which we all know the position about that. So we're trying very hard to find a resolution to that involves minimal cost, or at least gives us options about where we might be able to manage any potential savings easier as a consequence of locating staff somewhere else. But that's very, very early days in consideration at the moment. In terms of the Tom, yes, it is. It goes live technically tomorrow. Many of the issues that we've talked about will actually happen in August. But what I will say is that, you know, when you're moving things around like this, it is not a whole scale tomorrow. All these cases shift around from one worker to another. That would be really, really dangerous. We need to manage the movement of the work over a period of time when it is right and proper for those children and families. So we can't just say, right, Jean, your caseload's now moving over to Jill in the morning, job done. That is not how it works. That would be wholly unsafe. So there are processes around how you manage those things. Because of the shape of the Tom, some work is moving in clusters, if you like. So, for example, the PIP team is taking care proceedings and some of that work as a whole, and then that will move elsewhere. So the whole shape of the Tom is so different that we're having to step by step move the work to fit into it over time. But Jean will give you greater detail around that if I've missed anything.
I suppose the Well, we've already talked about one of the drivers being to create smaller teams. So one team manager with a smaller number of social workers, so that they understand the work, they're able to manage the work, they know the children that they're responsible for, and it's clear lines of accountability and so on. The other driver was to try and make sure that our safeguarding teams, who had previously, under the old model, been responsible for, it's not just about the numbers of cases that they're holding, it's about the complexity and the competing demands within those caseloads. So they would be holding high-level complex children in need cases, they'd be holding children with a child protection plan, they'd be in court doing court proceedings, they'd be visiting looked after children, sometimes placed a long way from the county. Some cases they'd be holding until adoption. You know, they were working with complex adolescents and all of those sorts of things. So it's not just about the number, it's about the complexity, and also, you know, some of the legacy issues that I referred to in some of the teams. That the most complex and most demanding work was being worked by the least experienced social workers. So the new target operating model is designed to try and address all of those issues. And the simplest way of describe the biggest change is to actually take the court work and the looked after children out of the safeguarding teams and place them where they should be, which is they're now calling it children in care teams, so that our specialist children in care teams are dealing with all our children in care. Because actually, although we had specialist children in care teams or looked after children's teams, around about 300 looked after children's were remaining with the safeguarding teams, and that seemed counterintuitive. You set up a specialist looked after children's service because in recognition that looked after children need something, you need the focus. You need to get that work over there. So that's in process. These are the things that are taking a little bit of time because we've got to make the decisions that are right for children. We can't just cut things off and move them. But it has happened. In fact, some of it had already happened. And in the Ofsted report at point 32 on page 6, Ofsted commented that the very newly formed care planning team, that's one of our new teams under the target operating model, is undertaking some impressive direct work with children, which is being used to inform children's current case plans. So that is an impact, actually, of that work.
Can I just add something to...
very briefly, Fiona, we're already way over time.
I promise you, Chairman. I just wanted to add something about the locality hubs very quickly, because that is a future. But actually, the districts and boroughs all coming together for unitaries is actually helping with that piece of work that I'm working on at the moment, to speak to, particularly in the area of the county I come from. We have office space, we have rooms available, and we at the moment have no area in the south of the county for our social workers to meet with families, etc. So I'm negotiating with South Northamptonshire at the moment to see if there's some space that we can use there. So that is ongoing, and that will be a benefit of the unitary.
Okay.
Can I just come very quickly?
We have finance colleagues desperate to come to the centre stage. I have a couple more, and then no more speakers. But I say, everybody, if you could be as brief as you can, please.
I'm just surprised you said that the locality is to come, because I thought we were already halfway there. I thought some of them had been set up. That was why I thought it was sort of a case of, right, we've got a couple of them set up, but a couple are still to come.
We do have targeted support teams out in the communities, in the localities, and one of the things that we're currently actively exploring is whether or not we can move some of the social workers out of here into work alongside the targeted support. So definitely in terms of our targeted support offer, that is being delivered across the county on a locality basis. The next stage is to try and see if we can get social workers alongside them.
Thank you. Questions and answers as brief as possible. Victoria.
Brief. Urgency. So as this is drawing to the end, I want to use the word urgency. 18 months ago, we talked about reconfiguring the office here for social workers. It's brilliant that it's happening, but my question would be, this isn't to go at you, did you have the right support from other departments here to make that happen? Because if you knew it wasn't a good idea 18 months ago, why couldn't it have happened 18 months ago? That's one question. The centre of everything you're saying to make this work is this career pathway. It keeps coming back. Everything you say comes back to, if we get that right, But at the moment, that is still something that's out there in the ether. I know you're waiting for legal advice and confirmation of financial benefits, and then we've got this other thing of, but also there'll be cost implications. But if that is the panacea of what's going to make this work, and without it, it won't work, we need confirmation of a deadline of when that's going to happen, confirmation that you have the right backing and support from the whole organisation to deliver that, and if you don't, what on earth will happen?
In terms of the office moves, well, it's the same answer in some ways. I wasn't here 18 months ago, so I'm not aware of the struggles that have happened in the previous 12 months. You're right, we've been challenged around the speed at which some of this has been able to be achieved over the last 6 months. And if it's any consolation, our Commissioner shares your frustration about why it hasn't happened sooner. Some of it is around some basic practical things like the IT requirements and the furniture requirements and the mapping and the planning and who's moving where. It's actually quite a complicated thing in a building this size. All I can say at this point is I'm glad that we've got to the point where we can see some activity at long last, and hopefully our staff will understand the benefits of that. In terms of the career pathway, you are right in the sense that we're pinning quite a lot on it in many respects, because we know from our own experiences that staff will be attracted to somewhere where they can see a future. And that is hard for us to promote a future here at the moment, and that's one of the things we want to try and overcome. There are considerable discussions going on, as I understand it, about the affordability of this, because it is going to be a costly option, and where the money will come from, I think, will be a matter of some debate going forward. If we don't get it and we can't do it, then our fallback position is that we have to try and promote the attributes that we do have, and make our, what's it called, the EVP, employer value proposition. Those HR people in the room will understand that. We need to be clear about what our offer is then if we can't go forward with that bit.
Just one quick follow-up on that. We've had the fallback position is the position we're in now.
Yeah.
And that has achieved, we haven't not a lot. So you quite rightly have put forward a plan, and I come back to what I said at the beginning. I know if you could deliver what you wanted to deliver, we could move this forward quickly. So whether this is an action point, but I'd like some confirmation that this has the backing and the sense of urgency and support that it can move forward. Otherwise, we are going to be getting more of the same.
Jonathan.
So I'll just make a couple more notes. This is going to be a machine gun value, questions after questions. So first thing here, is the children's services that you're described now with the recommendations and the things that you're putting in place, are you working towards delivering a trust, is one question. Second question, at circa £30 million, which is what roughly is going to cost us to go to a trust, is the trust going to fix the problems? Take it for granted that in 2016, when we first had our indications to Ofsted, 2 to 3 years previous to that is where the problem started. We're 2019 now, and you've stated it could be 3 to 5 years to fix the trust, or to fix it. And it's good to see that we've actually got some members of the Joint Committee, the Unitary, going forward, actually in the room today, because this could possibly be a case where joint working between two unitaries may be better to continue the service and fix it with the money that we're putting into it, because we keep saying that we've got no problem with money. Money's not an issue. Yet, you've just stated earlier, is that part of FRT is you're going to improve that with business rates coming in. That's extra money. So one thing is, if we know we're already over budget already, how much more over budget is children's services going to have to be for us to start fixing things? And finally, as I said, is the children's service model that you're doing now, are you working towards producing that as part of the trust going forward? And then the final question is, as the DCS here now, what assurance and confidence that you can deliver the service to the people of Northamptonshire that they require in children's services, and at what timescale, and most importantly, at what cost?
Some of which I think has already been covered in your early answers regarding trust, but nonetheless, please.
Thank you. We will be working towards helping our colleagues in delivering the Children's Trust. That will be a requirement for us, and we will have to do that in parallel also with concentrating on the improvement of the services as they currently stand. My conversations with the Commissioner would suggest there is no immediate requirement to change the model of delivery. The Trust may change its mind in 3 to 5 years' time. I don't know that, but we are confident that the model that we have designed is one that will give us evidence of improvement. You are right that where Jean and I sit and the experience we bring to the table is telling us that we are not going to be able to turn this around quickly. It would be wrong for us to come here and say this will be mended in 6 months, 9 months, a year. We know that it will take a period of time to affect the level of change that we need to get the service to get over any line that says it's a good service. Some bits of it are at the moment, but the whole service needs to improve in order for us to become a good authority as rated and graded by Ofsted. In terms of personal assurance that I can give you, all I can say to you is that I and my team have been brought in with the express requirement of improving the quality of service as quickly and efficiently as we can. I can give you an assurance that that is what we are striving to do all the time. In terms of the finance, you know the challenges that we face in children's services. This has been rehearsed right across the piece. We endeavour to try and achieve our improvements within the budget envelope that we've got, but we do face significant challenges on those 2 areas that I said right at the very beginning, staff costs and placement costs. And a lot of the efforts that we're putting in is trying to address those 2 particular very high spend areas.
Thank you. Graham, last questions.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got 3 or 4. Some have been answered already, so we'll cut them out. In 2.1 of the update overview we've got here, it says this, talking about caseloads, it said this should be alleviated. That doesn't sound that confident a statement. So can you give us some idea of the degree of certainty or expectation you have that will be solved by the Tom? Because we've had Toms here before.
The difficulty, we are clear that the structure that we have set up gives us the ratios that we want to achieve. But we have to be very clear that until we get enough qualified staff through the door to be able to deal with those cases, we will continue to struggle. We can't allocate stuff to people that aren't here. It's the simple, that's the simple and the arithmetic of it is if you do not have enough people to do the work, then you can't allocate it out. What I will say is that I am not prepared to see cases allocated to staff in such great numbers that they cannot be effective. That is absolutely pointless. That is a numbers exercise of being able to come to you and say we don't have any unallocated work, when actually what we've done is raise everyone's caseloads to unmanageable levels and compound the problem. I would rather us be honest and say, and we do look at how many unallocated cases we have on any one day, any one week, what we're trying to do to manage those cases safely and effectively at the same time as reflect that we're not in a position to be able to allocate all our work at the moment, and we won't be until we get more and better and permanent staff.
Thank you. So my subsidiary was going to be, there's a dichotomy, isn't there, between having a number of unallocated cases and a workload for each worker. So how do you square the circle there? I mean, it's which is the least worst option is almost the question, isn't it?
It is, but my firm belief is we will never retain and we will lose more staff if we just keep piling more and more and more work on the staff that we've got. One of the things we have to offer is a manageable workload. If we cannot offer that, then we're on a hiding to nothing. What I can say is that the cases that are not allocated are those that are of lower level of concern. They are managed on a duty rota. They are visited by duty staff. So they have cover, but they are not being worked as such. So the plan about how the family is going to be improving, for example, is not the work that's happening. What we can do is check that people are safe and well. So we do have cover and oversight on those cases, but we're not working them in the way that Jean described earlier around what we're going to do with the improvement of those families. And it's a matter of great regret to us that we can't do that. But you know, in the more successful we are in recruiting people to work with us, the more that position will improve.
Okay, in 2.3, this is a quick one, it talks about reducing the number of children placed out of county. It doesn't put any numbers on it. Can you give us some idea of the reduction that's happened?
Well, we have got, our numbers of looked after children varies from day to day. Our percentage of children in residential care is reducing, but we have a number of children going into residential care who are younger, which is wholly unacceptable. So we are looking at the total sufficiency of the resource that we have internally, both residential and fostering. We are looking at, we try very hard actually to find other fostering placements which are not necessarily ours, independent fostering placements, rather than residential care. As I said at one point, that we know that 14% of our looked after children take 40% of our looked after placement budget. So some of our children, and it's mainly the ones that are the top end children, are the most costly, and they're in quite unsuitable places. And those are the ones that we're working through our panels to bring back as quickly as we possibly can.
I was trying to get some idea of the number, but there's quite a number of things in here that are to be done by the end of July. We've heard that the phase 1 TOM is one of them, so it's effective tomorrow. The business support was another. So how many of the things that are in here that are scheduled to be done by the end of July are on track?
I would say the majority of the things that we said we would do by the end of July, we are doing. I mean, we're constantly reviewing our improvement plan all the time. We basically strive to achieve them all as fast as we possibly can.
We lost a month with Ofsted.
Yeah, as Jean quite helpfully points out, we lost a month with Ofsted. I'd forgotten about that. It just takes a month of everybody's time away completely, because we have to support the Ofsted process, and managers get involved substantially in doing that. And that can also make a dip in performance because people are concentrating on supporting the Ofsted process rather than concentrating on the improvement.
Couple more. And the move to the TOM and some of the changes you've identified earlier could leave some of the staff confused, disrupted, and uncertain about what they're going. How are you going to manage the staff? I mean, you talked about managing the actual process and where things are going. How are you going to manage the staff? And it's part of the training and governance, of course.
We're trying very hard to communicate on a weekly basis with staff to let them know the progress that we're making. We've undertaken, as Sally said, a number of consultation events with staff. Part of the move to the new target operating model is premised on supporting staff to move to the bit of the service where they feel they can make the biggest contribution, that interests the most, where they have the most skills. So, for example, we're really clear that when we develop the adolescent service, it has to be staffed by people that really love working with teenagers. That doesn't appeal to everybody, but the people that it does appeal to, they're the ones that we need to encourage. So, while, yes, you're right, of course, any change can cause uncertainty and some anxiety. We're doing our best to mitigate that in the ways that I've said, and we have already supported some staff to move from the teams that they were in. The court work team that I've just read out from Ofsted, that Ofsted commented on, the quality of the work that was being produced, that was part of that. So we said, who really loves doing the court work, who feels that their skills are best placed in that direction, supported them to move, and that's the impact, that you get people that are really enthusiastic about the work that they're doing, and it shows, it pays off.
Can I just add that this has been going on for several months, from my knowledge as well, that staff have been talked to for several months about this, and we've been open to their views moving forward. It isn't like on the 1st of August we're going to tell you all to do this. That hasn't happened at all.
That's reassuring. Last point, we've heard that a lot of this is going to be expensive. You said you need funding, and we're already, a couple of my colleagues have mentioned it, already 5.4 million overspent after 2 months. How do you see the budget going forward? And given that a lot of the things you're doing are driven by what the Commissioner wants, are the two sets of Commissioners, the Children's and the Finance and Lead one, on the same page? Because obviously they have maybe competing interests.
Thank you, Jean. Okay. I absolutely need to assure you that the Financial Commissioners, the Children's Commissioner, the Chief Executive, all of us are on the same page when it comes to wanting to improve the quality of services for children in this authority. That is an absolute given. Everyone has a different perspective about how it can be achieved, I have to say, but that common purpose is understood. What I will say about the budget, you are right, we're not in a comfortable position in children's services at the moment. And that is why a lot of the work is going on around, particularly around the placement stuff, because although we are a high spender, it is locked. It's locked in expenditure for agency staff, and it's locked in placement costs at the moment, and we're striving to unlock that to give us some flexibility. I also have, it's like every other element or the department in the authority, savings targets that we are struggling to meet for all obvious reasons. If I could achieve the savings targets, it would clearly be because we're spending money unwisely, and we know where our money is being spent, and we know where it's locked. And until we can unlock the money for the agency and the placements, then we will struggle to achieve a big turnaround in our financial position. That's clearly obvious. So the placement work is particularly something that we're concentrating on at the moment. We have to balance our need to get children back into the authority, back into our own placements, build up our placement resource, which, as those of you who have been involved in fostering recruitment and things over years will recognise, does not happen overnight. But nonetheless, we are driving that forward. But we also have to balance that with our statutory need to make sure that the placement meets the need of the child. So this is not bringing everybody back to save money. We have to make those decisions on an individual child basis. But we meet every week now, and we go through those lists, and we are considering those children where we can either bring them back into the authority, step them down into fostering, or reunify with their family quicker with additional support. So in terms of overall, in terms of the budget, we are sorely challenged in children's to meet our savings requirements. We know that our money is locked in those two particular areas. We know that if we overspend, then other areas of the authority will face additional challenges. I know that. I absolutely know that. All I can do is assure you that we also know that improving a children's services costs money. It can't be done on the cheap, but we are endeavouring to do it within the finance that we have, but we will be challenged about that.
Thank you, and I'm sure I think everybody around this table absolutely agrees with the improvement of the service is what we're all about. Very quickly, if you could, please.
Coming back on that, we need money to improve the services. Have government ministers been asked? I understand they have, but have government ministers been asked for more money for this authority to undertake that work?
We make applications as far and as fast as we can for any opportunities of government funding to support us. So, for example, the family group conferencing that I was talking about earlier is a national programme that we bid to. We're hopeful that we might be successful with that to put back some of the gaps that were identified through the Ofsted report and other things that have long since gone here. In terms of the money to support us moving into the trust, then there will be an ask made of government from the DFE to support the work that needs to be done to put the children's services into a children's trust, and we will maximise any opportunity we get through that process. We're not proud when it comes to trying to find additional financial sources.
Can I just add, although, you know, it's true that improvement requires some investment in the right places, but the good news is, and I know it sounds like a cliche, but it is absolutely true, that good practice costs less. Yeah, if we can get the practice right, we will spend less in every single area.
Thank you very much, and I think on behalf of the whole committee, Jonathan, come on, really?
Yeah, really?
Okay,
really.
go on then. One last question.
So we're saying that we're going to go to the government for assistance in the trust. The trust we know is going to be circa 30 million. Are you saying that we're going to get the whole 30 million from the government? Because if not, that 30 million, or there or thereabouts, is actually going to have to come out of the unitary money. So one way is, question mark is, how much are we going to be expecting to pay for the trust? Because if not, we might as well not have the trust chair and continue as we go, because it'll be cheaper.
Malcolm, only because you haven't spoken, very briefly, last question, and I don't know if they'll pick up on yours, Jonathan.
That's on now, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Very quickly, but I think it needs to be said, is that when I woke up this morning, I thought, my God, here we go again. You know what I mean? But can I say, ladies, thank you very much indeed. Tonight I will sleep very, very well, knowing that all this stuff is not totally on our hands as councillors, but with you, and you have this wonderful plan, and obviously our job now in the future is just to monitor that plan to make sure that everything's going well. But bottom of my heart, I do thank you, because this is a big issue, not only here, but in the whole of Northamptonshire, about this situation that we're none of us happy to be in with, but we are there, but we now see, hopefully, the light at the end of the tunnel. And I thank you all very much indeed for your teams as well. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Firstly, can I just say then thank you, Councillor. Your support is very much appreciated, because, as we all recognise around here, this is a tough gig. Anyway, in terms of the Children's Trust, it is a given. It has been agreed by the Minister. It will happen. In terms of the funding for it, there is a conversation that will happen between the County Council and the Department for Education about the cost of the conversion into a trust and the funding for that. And that conversation is an ongoing conversation which will take place. The cost of the going into the trust, if you like, the mechanism of going into it, will be supported by the DFE. But the running cost of the trust will be that the local authorities will be expected to fund in the same way as you fund the department now. So the cost of running the services, all the social work services, all this, that and the other, is a cost that the local authority pays for, and that will continue as it goes into the trust. But the money to become a trust and all the mechanisms and the unpicking and all that kind of design and all that stuff will be supported by the DFE.
I think Jonathan
As I understand it, yes.
Yeah.
As I understand it.
Yeah, I think Jonathan was referring to the set-up costs and whether they will entirely be funded from government, but we shall see. Thank you, to echo Malcolm's point, thank you very much, Sally, Jean, Fiona, for being here today. I appreciate some of those questions, long drawn out and very difficult at times, but we really appreciate as a committee your response. Your work is done. I don't want any more questions for them, although you can stay for a minute if you want, because I just want to throw open to the committee 2 minutes if you wish to make any final points, or hopefully you don't. I think the minutes probably so far will include pretty much what we're saying. Victoria.
Could we just, are we going to discuss after they've gone some set recommendations and check that they are captured in the minutes? Because just to double check that what we're
sorry, so you want to make a... Sorry, say again?
Well, I just wanted to check in the minutes that there was a clear recommendation that we want a deadline on the career pathway.
Okay.
And some absolute clarity about whether it's going to happen or not, or whether it's a pipe dream. Because I think we heard today, we had it confirmed that that is ideally what is required if we're going to make the changes at the pace we want to make them. And in the words of the DCS, if that doesn't happen, our fallback position is what we have now.
Okay, that point will be in the minutes and conveyed.
And that, and the other point would be that I totally understand that all the team are in agreement that they want to make improvements in children's service. Obviously, I heard that there was a word there, not necessarily in agreement of how that's going to be achieved. I think this committee need confirmation that this group of very senior, highly paid individuals are paid to actually come to an agreement. Because until they come to an agreement, it's slowing the progress, and this goes back to urgency. So I want some reassurance that they are in agreement of how, and as soon as possible, because to not be is not acceptable at this stage.
I think, again, that concern could be included in the minutes. And I've got... James.
A couple of points through you, Chair. I mean, certainly the minutes can include, by definition, include a summary of the discussion at any meeting. The question may be is if the committee wishes to take some more specific action to relay any recommendations. The other point on the Children's Services Improvement Plan is, of course, that has been presented to Cabinet and noted, in effect, endorsed by Cabinet. So, sorry? Well, no, in response to Councillor Perry's point about senior buy-in to the improvement plan, that should be provided by the fact that it's been, it has the buy-in of Cabinet.
However, scrutiny can, of course, have its own concerns around there, and I'm quite happy for those 2 points Councillor Perry has raised to be put to...
Through you, Chair, I wasn't seeking to contradict Councillor Perry's, but the purpose of raising Councillor Perry's point, but to provide some reassurance that may exist at least in part.
I wasn't interested in Cabinet's buy-in. I was interested in the buy-in of the senior management team.
Who worked the political leadership of the council.
Commissioner. Okay, happy for those 2 points if people agree to be included in some specific conclusions from this debate. I've got Cecile, then Anjona.
Yes,
and Michael.
we also, during the questioning, that was quite robust and sometimes it must have felt uncomfortable. But I would like, if there is new project to change the dialogues with helping the parents and so on, could we have them in front of scrutiny, how they work and what is the effect? Because if we change the method of helping the family, how it is working, I think it's quite important for us to understand that we are on the right trajectory. Thank you.
Anjona?
Really grateful, Councillor Perry, that you raised the issue about the career pathway, and in your presentation you put it as a kind of dichotomy of career pathway or where we are at the moment. There are other options. At the moment we've got the career pathway, which there currently is no agreed resource for, as far as I understand it. There are other ways, such as return to national terms and conditions, and again, we don't have the resource for it, but is an alternative view. Mrs Hodges emphasised a lot that the trust was a done deal. It is maybe a done deal, but even the unitary statutory instrument hasn't gone through Parliament, and we were assured it would go through Parliament by the end of July, and it hasn't done. So in terms of that, I think we are in extraordinary times and we need to be considering other alternatives, that we need to be able to respond to what other environments are placed before us.
This isn't really a question now, we're talking amongst the committee, and I guess your point is that you would like it made about the whole service remaining flexible to any changes that may or may not occur in the future. Yeah.
Mr Chairman, one point that the trust is a done deal. The Minister has already...
In fairness, it hasn't gone through Parliament, but I take the point. Sorry, I've lost my list now. Michael and then Richard.
Yeah, in summary, Mr Chairman, I think that the message which came through time and again is that there are no short-term fixes to any of these problems at NCC. And we're all, in all likelihood, to have another visit from Ofsted and another underwhelming report, and we might as well get used to it. We just have to rate the progress that we're making. Mm-hmm. And you quoted the figure of 2 to 3 years on this journey, if I'm repeating you correctly, understood you correctly, before NCC in whatever form, whether its present form is not going to be, but probably in the trust form, this problems will migrate to the trust, but it will be 2 to 3 years before we see the sort of Ofsted positive ratings that we all look for. Is that a fair summary? Yes. Mm-hmm. Joy is unbounded. Thank you.
Okay, so I guess your comment may be the word that Councillor Perry used earlier about urgency, and that this committee understands that urgency and wants to articulate it. Yeah, Richard?
3 years if we do the things we need to do.
Yeah, no, understood.
That's every authority.
Yeah, I don't want to contradict my friend about that there are no short-term fixes. There is a lot of operational stuff on there that came up with regard to what needs to improve, and the sort of the low line through the operational stuff, the supervision stuff, to try and making sure that what we are doing well. So I would like on the report to make sure we emphasise that yes, this is long-term, but there are things we can do straight away to improve operational effectiveness, and I would like to ensure that we see that done.
Okay. Another point, Cecile, and then just to clarify what we want to do with these points, send them in a note to Cabinet for the next Cabinet meeting, perhaps?
The director says that 40% of all the costs due to 40% of placement. So maybe I would like to see how that can be addressed, and maybe have a table if there is a variation. Thank you.
Okay, that's perhaps further information for scrutiny. Do you understand what's being asked for?
Yes, I do. That is the process that we're going through in the panels, and we will be monitoring absolutely the cost of placements and the cost of the additional support. We'll need to step them down, etc., and that is part of that monitoring process. So, it has only just begun, so we don't have information that tells you whether it's been successful or not. We anticipate it will be, but I would ask that give us a chunk of time to do it, then we've got something to tell you.
Just a short written briefing when you are able. Yeah. Okay.
Process. I have got one report to bring to Cabinet next week.
Okay.
The week after, and we started that progress.
Okay. Apart from that, our committee happy that the half a dozen or so now points have been raised should be passed to Cabinet, James?
Well, I think, Chair, the salient points, the ones that were expressed as recommendations, were the ones raised by Councillor Perry most recently. Confirmation about that the career pathway work will happen and the deadline for it, and scrutiny seeking reassurance that there is the appropriate senior buy-in to the Children's Services Improvement Plan that is already on the table. The other points mentioned, I would think, say, are more contextual than those.
I'm happy to leave it to your...
Could I also ask that the committee agrees to delegate authority to yourself as the committee chairman to sign off the final version of the reports to Cabinet, which clearly is intended to reflect the discussion and the points arising. And
I think as a last point, it would be remiss of us not to articulate our concern, if I'm honest, about the Ofsted report. We need to recognise the seriousness of that and make sure that our Cabinet colleagues understand that we are concerned about that.
Maybe the sign-off includes the Vice Chairs as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, Victoria, then Graham.
So just really quick one in that. When the whatever.
Is in that the senior buy-in, but also it's that question of the changes they're wanting to make that involve other departments in this organisation. Are they getting the required level of support from place, etc., whose cooperation you need to make certain changes?
Just one of the main factors we've heard about is the level of staffing, so I think we ought to be receiving regular reports on how the retention and recruitment is going in terms of numbers of workers.
Okay, and we'll look at Councillor Perry for an update on that in due course then. Thank you again, very much appreciate it, and thank you especially to finance colleagues at the back of the room who have been waiting more than patiently. We're about to move to the second substantial item on the agenda, and I know you're keen to get on, and I know I'm sure you've got other places to be, but I am going to call for a 5-minute comfort break. People need to clear their heads, stretch their legs and get a breath of fresh air. Thank you. And the filming is continuing, so if you've got anything derogatory to say about the chairman, please wait till after the meeting. Thank you. Okay, everybody, we're about to start the game. Okay, anybody that's not here, they'll have to catch up. Welcome to part 2. Second item, substantive item on the agenda is finance. I'd like to welcome Councillor Malcolm Longley, Ian Duncan, the Section 151 officer, and Sally Hodges. Again, well done, because a lot of the overspending currently is being projected, of course, in children's. Sorry? Brief appearance for this part. Okay. Right, before we start, for those that don't know, I would like to announce, well, it's not my place to announce, but Ian Duncan, Section 151 officer, will be leaving the organisation in September at the end of his fixed-term contract. I'd just personally like to thank you for all your efforts over the last year or so. It has been really useful. We've spoken many times about how the transparency of the Cabinet reports, for example, appear to have got a lot better. Still work to do, I'm sure, but we appreciate the efforts. We're here today to look at the in-year budget position. Sorry, Malcolm Longley.
Yeah, I'd like to follow that up, Chair, because we have had a very good experience with Ian, and we're very sorry to see him go. His replacement will be coming in 1 day a week, starting next week, I believe, next Monday, a guy called Barry Scarf. And I've described him as Ian. He looks like Ian's older brother, and he's got very similar. He's got the same accent, and he looks very similar. So it must be something up in the north. Okay. Anyway, we look forward to seeing him.
I'm sure we'll all be googling him to find out what we can about him in the next future. We're here to discuss the in-year budget position, which we'll remember, and in fact included in our papers today are the Cabinet papers that went to the July Cabinet meeting, showing a overspend of just under 5.8 million. Top of my head. Also, I think we want to discuss where this committee can input into future plans, future savings proposals, even next year's budget. Do you want to give just a very brief overview on the current position before we open it up to questions?
Thanks, Chair. I can do that. Sally's sitting on my right at my request, in case you had questions around children's services. But I'm wondering whether you've had all of those, in which case Sally isn't needed. But she's certainly the expert on the children's services budgets. That's why I've asked her.
Okay, first round of questions, if there are to be any, then can we focus on the children's element in the budget? Chris.
Thanks, Chair. So, yeah. So focusing on children's initially, while Sally's still here, thank you for staying. So the overspend is almost entirely down to budget delivery within the children's service, and there are a number of paragraphs in the report which details savings which are only going to be delivered in part, or which are not going to be delivered at all. For instance, I'll just pick on one. The reorganisation saving of £1.207 million will not be delivered as this was predicated on dissolution of dedicated teams. This is no longer planned. So things that only 2 to 3 months ago we were confident would be delivered are now not going to be delivered. The worry is that there is a lack of robustness within the service around budgeting. So how is that being, if that is indeed a worry that's shared by senior staff, how is that being addressed, please?
I can assure Scrutiny that we take our responsibility about our budget issues very seriously indeed. It's a conversation that happens daily on a micro level and also on a wider level. There are a number of issues around the savings that we're not going to be able to achieve this year because of delays on some of them around implementation for different practical reasons, but also because some of them were not likely to be achieved in any case, in my view. For example, the international social worker recruitment, we're not doing that anymore. But the savings around that are not likely to be achieved. The agency conversion in particular, people are not interested in coming to us permanently, as we discussed earlier. So we're not likely to be able to achieve those savings either, despite us speaking to staff and promoting it as an approach and a process and an opportunity. People don't want to do it. So a lot of the savings that have come here in the past and recent past have been things that are on the margins of achievability, and we're finding as the year rolls on that some of them we're not going to be able to achieve. What I will say in terms of managing the money is that we look at our budget all the time. We meet regularly with colleagues. We're under pressure from colleagues all the time about achieving our savings, and we're coming up with as many mechanisms as we can to try and identify where we can make the savings, but at the same time try and maintain some kind of safe service. So a lot of the things that we were talking about this morning around looking at our placements in particular and how we can step down some of those and release some of the monies is really where we're concentrating a lot of our efforts.
If I could just add to that, Chris, you've got to bear in mind that this is a year-end forecast after period 2. There's a lot of water to go under this bridge yet. Some will be good, some will be bad. So this is a year-end forecast at this point in time. It's not an actual position. Period 3 is virtually complete. It'll be out any day if it's not out already. And that actually will show a slight improvement. Not much, not enough to get excited about. But I think Sally answered it quite well earlier on. I think it might have been Graham's question. I can't remember exactly what it was. But robust conversations will take place.
So just following up what you say, Malcolm, my concern is that the service is not able to budget properly. I'm wondering if that is a concern that is shared by any of the three of you, and my question was what actions are being taken, if that's a concern that's shared, to address that. If the answer is robust conversations are taking place, then fine, but is that all?
I think the question about, because the budget was only agreed in February, and why is there such a turnaround, is a perfectly reasonable one. I know when I joined that what you would normally expect are the contemplation of savings would have been more advanced than they were here, and therefore there was less time to get into the detail, and Paul Helsby and his transformation team joining as well. So when it came to the time to put specific actions and plans in place, that's where we started to see a number of these things unravel. In terms of what we're doing, the quarter, we'll call it in a quarter 1 report, the P3 report, will be an enhancement to the usual report that you receive, and there'll be commentary from each service directorate about the issues they've faced, but also the mitigation. And certainly in children's services, one of the features is around the panels being established with a view to safely stepping down children. I think that's the main focus from a financial point of view at the moment. But this report, which will be due out, I think, on Monday, will have more detail than is usually contained.
Thank you. I think there are two questions here, aren't there? There's how the overall budget will be achieved or not achieved. But, I mean, Councillor Stanborough's point, I guess, was about concerns that this committee had before the budget was set about two things, about forecasting demand, and we've seen from the Cabinet report that both in children's and adults this has increased more than forecast, and also those specific savings proposals that we now know will not be delivered, or not, at least not in full. What action is taken, which I gather we're going to see next week then, about mitigating that is almost a separate question, but that's just my point. Richard.
Yeah, thank you. I want to take us back to when we set this budget. Like nothing could have surprised you with regard to the challenges in children's services. Nothing. And when we questioned you and said about, you know, how robust are these figures? We were given well, it's all different now. We've done absolutely everything. We know exactly what the costs will be. When I raised the point, well, actually, that's what was said last year and the year before, and everyone has, well, it's completely different this time. Trust us. My concern is not so much about the spend in children's, it's about the money we allocate in the first place. If I want to buy £1,000 car and I put 700 quid in my car account, when I come to buy it, I am going to be short of money when it comes to purchasing the item. My concern is did we get the budget wrong in the first place? We must have known about these challenges. Did we have the contingencies to say, well, actually, they need a little bit more money? Because everyone guaranteed us that the right money was in the right place to pay for these services. I accept this is an early report, but it goes to sort of prove my frustration as a member of the public. I could just say, look, you know, you as a scrutiny committee, yes, we scrutinised, we challenged, we wanted to know that this was the amount of money we're going to spend. Now, we're moving on to a projected 5.8 million, and I'm sure you'll do great things in reducing that. But don't you see my fundamental point? Did we get the budget wrong in the first place? Did we give them enough money? And are we asking them to make savings which simply aren't there?
Yeah, thanks for that, Richard. There's a finite amount of money that's allocated in, and it's a matter of opinion of whether we got it right or wrong. My opinion is we got it right.
Sorry, just come out, but surely the whether you got it right or not will be on the outcomes. So perhaps at the end of the year we'll make that judgment, Councillor.
Robust conversations.
Okay, sir.
Look forward to those conversations. Victoria.
This is following on from Richard's point, because a lot of these savings were put forward in the stabilisation plan. And without going into I told you so, I didn't agree with the stabilisation plan, but actually it was imposed on us by the commissioners. And I'm going to say that because it's the truth. And we're all about transparency now. We're a new organisation. Particularly the overseas recruitment, that was never going to work. Absolutely never. The staff conversion, I'm just going to refer back to that. What's stopping that progressing? Career pathway. So some of the savings that are not going to be delivered are dependent on what we discussed earlier, which is the career pathway. So this is all about moving it forward. And then 5.12, which is the placement sufficiency, what I'd be interested in there, this is due to slippage in the implementation of the projects. So where does that sit? Does that sit in children's, or does it sit in place in terms of the locating and development of children's homes, or the redevelopment of Tiffield, which obviously could bring us a lot of savings and make us money? So is that sitting with us, or is that sitting elsewhere? And do we need to be asking questions of other departments in relation to this placement, the slippage in placements?
Yes, in relation to 5.12, there is some slippage in the conversion of some of those units. Some of it is about the buildings issues, not particularly. Some of it is about Ofsted being slow off the pace with the registration of the managers, because, as you know, they need to be officially registered through Ofsted before we can open it as a unit. What I can assure you now is that most of that building work is taking place, that Ofsted have been prompted to do the registrations quicker, that we have done the round of recruitment for those staff, and we're about to start training those staff in those different units. The Tiffield site remains another issue separately to that one, but these are about the other smaller units. But it comes back to the issue before about our placement sufficiency generally. and making sure that we maximise what placement opportunities we've got. This forms a very small part of it. The bigger issue is the fostering.
On that one, there was going to be a targeted campaign for single occupancy, high need foster placements, where they could keep the bed open for the whole year.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how that's progressed, but it could cover some of this.
I would have to be honest and say I don't think our fostering recruitment has been as robust and rigorous as it should have been over time. Essentially, as an authority, we should have been looking at this 2 to 3 years ago. In the projections of the children that we should have been able to identify the numbers are likely to rise, or at the very least, you know, the constituent client group within the number will change and will become more costly. So even those authorities where the numbers have come down, their costs have remained the same because the client group is a particularly difficult and expensive client group. Here we have both. We have the numbers going up, but we also have a particularly difficult and expensive client group, which is why we're trying to manage the cost of the placements as well as the reduction in the total number.
Okay, I've got Michael, Jill, Cecile, and then myself. Michael.
We spent 2 hours in going into great detail on the problems which the Children's Directorate has. And one of the areas which is causing great concern is the recruitment of social workers, or good social workers. That is reflected in the budget overspend analysis on page 94. Top of the page, we have net staffing budget, underspend due to the difficulty in recruiting to qualified social worker posts. Now, that makes sense, but I'm trying to understand how that can be used as a saving when the saving itself is a purely short-term factor, which is likely to be, in effect, eroded or neutralised as you do recruit people of calibre who we're looking for, or convert agency people in the course of the year. So is this figure in brackets of a saving of an underspend of 3.28 million something which is likely to change and, in fact, reduce as you recruit more people? i.e. the overspend will increase?
Is that a saving we had?
I think as part of the development of the operating model, we're more able now in a position to say exactly what the staffing cost of the organisation will be. We have braced it and predicated it on percentages of agency staff which we think is acceptable. One of the difficulties we've got is that it was originally predicated on about 80% of the staff being permanent and only a small percentage of the staff being agency, which we now know is not achievable. Whether or not we can achieve a saving as we go forward, ideally if we can recruit and convert, or whatever it is, more of those staff into permanent staff, then our overall staffing spend should reduce.
But could you just address the point? You're putting in a figure here, a saving of 3.28 million, which is a material figure in accounting terms. Are you saying, in effect, that that was a gross underestimate at the time the budgets were put together, or is it just a fact of life and it's not going to change?
I think we probably have to accept it as a fact of life at the moment until such times as we are more successful with our recruitment and our retention.
But the intention is to increase the number of qualified social workers.
Yeah.
So that number
no, the intention is we're not increasing the total number of social workers. We are trying to increase the number of social workers within those posts that are qualified, experienced and are fit for purpose. But the difficulty we have at the moment is we are having to fill them with agency staff which are almost double the cost.
Okay, so finally, that 3.28 million is a robust figure which we like to see reoccurring in the course of the year.
I would like to think that it might reduce, but it is possible that it will re-recur throughout the year until we can change our staffing profile.
Jill.
Thank you. In 5.10, it mentions a reorganisation that is no longer planned. Well, I'm not quite clear which reorganisation this is, and is this a change of policy or change of tack between doing the budget and now? Because because it says that it was for the dissolution of dedicated teams with their functions transferring into the wider social care teams.
Areas of work that there was an original proposal we should stop doing. However, it is not safe for us to stop doing that, and we therefore have put that work within the envelope of the TOM. But that means that we cannot, in not getting rid of that service, we cannot make that saving that as it was originally projected.
Do we know which of those?
This is about working with children who are looked after. This is about providing life story work for children. That is a statutory requirement that we have to do. We have to provide life story work of good quality. The reference is made to it in the Ofsted report. And permanency planning, again, which is a statutory function. So at the time this was set, it wasn't an issue. I wasn't here at the time that this was set, but my clear view is that we have to fulfil our statutory duties. We are trying to do that, or we will be doing that now, within the envelope of the TOM budget as set, but it was identified as a particular line of saving which we now cannot make.
I'm just surprised that something like the life story should have been proposed not to do it if it's a statutory responsibility. That seems unusual.
The proposal, as I understand it, this is before I came, the proposal was that work would generally be absorbed by other staff within the service. But we know from, and all the previous conversations we've had earlier this morning about caseload, workloads and quality, that that is an assumption, I think, that was perhaps ambitious.
Thank you. This, I think, actually is a pertinent point for me to raise my question, which was going to be, when we see the Cabinet's report, all these various paragraphs and sentences relating to specific proposals or otherwise, it's very difficult, I think, sometimes for the Scrutiny Committee to match them up necessarily with the budget that we looked at earlier in the year. For example, with the budget, the list of saving proposals, we get these silly numbers, which I hate, 18.00, 1.13, etc. But if the Cabinet report could relate to those, if there could at the end of each paragraph maybe be a bracket with the numbers that they relate to, we can at least know which one we were talking about. Sometimes the description doesn't always make it easy to follow what we discussed earlier on in the year, if that makes sense. Maybe that's something section 151 could take away. Cecile.
Thank you so much. First, I would like to thank the way the paper is delivered, because it's easier. But what I do not like is that you have big item and small item together. Because you have 3 million and after you go back to 70,000 or 20,000. So that for me doesn't help me to understand the direction of travel. But there is one thing. In the last year, the year before and the year before, we always suddenly have a big things about asylum-seeking children. And last year, we said it cost us much. This year, we say we are in control. There is 5 pieces of work for asylum seeker. Are we now on top of the cost of asylum seeker? How much do we have? Because every year, it seems that we have that problem, and we are 1, 2, 3 million adrift for roughly 100 children. And I think by now we should have better way to understand those asylum seekers, knowing that at the beginning they were all coming from war, conflict like Syria, and now we have very little of those. So could we have reassurance that we do better with our asylum seeker and you can get into the budget?
One of the things that we've been achieving with our asylum-seeking children is their move to their different accommodation, and that has happened. And my understanding is that those young people who have moved there are happy with that. Some of the delay in achieving some of the other changes has been around, if you remember the Cabinet report that talked about the changes in the support they would get and the need to do human rights assessments on the remaining children. And we're in the middle of doing those now because there is a time gap. It takes so long to be able to do those, and that's where we are with those children at the moment. So I think probably in terms of areas we need to worry about, this is not one of the top of the list because progress is being made.
Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. We're at risk of going all over the place again. We roughly touched on Tiffield, but with the amount of out-of-area placements that we have, and we're paying for that, and some of these are into shall we dare say, use the word children's homes, but accommodations. How come is it that we have a facility in our county of a size that is actually a residential centre, albeit what Grendon Hall is, but it is a residential centre. It's already set up as a residential centre, and we put it on the market. If we sell that, that's capital. If we utilise it, then that comes off the revenue budget. Why would we sell a building that is already half there or three-quarters of the way there for a residential purpose, with a little bit more of investment in it, can actually turn it into a residential home in our own county? Surely there's savings there that we're not looking at, or we should be looking at making, rather than sending Northamptonshire children out of county. And that's also with, obviously, you know, with UASC as well. Could we utilise that area for UASC when we're putting them into residential care? And another one, like I said, we'd go all over the place, but we've got also an extra demand on transport, on care transport costs. I had a conversation which evidenced that social workers are booking taxis to transfer children to appointments and things like that themselves, rather than going through the transport sector that we've got in this county. So we've got place that are providing transport, yet we've got social workers booking taxis on their own back. Who's paying for that? We've already budgeted it because we've already got a contract with a organisation to provide that service for us, and yet we're paying extra for it out of another department that doesn't need to those spends. So it does seem that we're all over the place a little bit in certain areas, and I'm just wondering if those savings that I've just mentioned on utilising the properties that we've already got in this county that we own, that are ours, why would we take them out of county and spend money to put them somewhere else?
Absolutely agree with you there, John. We've got a situation coming up at the next Cabinet meeting. There will be it's a fairly small project, as a £150,000 spend for a £60,000 a year saving. Precisely the sort of thing, an instruction that I gave at CLT on Tuesday was give me another 50. I'll do, you know, if you remember at the budget, I said productivity, productivity, time and time again. And that's a classic example. So what you're saying is absolutely manna from heaven. If we can give me 50 projects like that, no problem.
What was their answer to that?
Bit of stunned silence, I think. I'm not quite sure.
Oh, okay. So hopefully ideas like that may be progressed. Richard. Oh, sorry.
Maybe we should have CLT in this room and ask them the same question then.
Fair point.
Yeah, just another one. It sort of follows on from Cecile's point about presentation. Can we have our little graph back? You know, when we because for me, you know, if you are right as a team and you did a great job last year, there's no doubt. But we want to see that trajectory coming down to breaking. So it would be good to reintroduce that, and so we can sort of have that visual projection of where we're going. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions on the in-year budget situation? I suppose it's a little bit difficult in that we're being told that in a week's time we're going to get a completely different view, and it's a moving feast, obviously.
Yeah, you will, quite right, Chair, and you will get your usual brief Thursday week, and the position is marginally better, but essentially the same. Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Any more questions specifically on children's? Otherwise, we can let Sally go.
Can I just ask one question? Sorry, Malcolm, do we still own Longtown?
I don't know.
Because the only reason why, Chair, is that's another residential establishment that we own, and then we can send these kids on holiday to our own establishment.
I'm reliably informed we sold it, but I'm not familiar.
Yeah, it's my paper.
Thank you. No more further questions specifically on children's? Sally, thank you once again for your forbearance. Yeah. Okay, any more general questions, Graham?
Well, there's a couple in the corporate. I just wondered, there's a saving that's not going to be realised, which is 687,000 for fees and charges, uplift not achieved. So I wondered why we're not able to raise those charges. And also, and this is just really a comment, it does seem for a part-year assistant chief of staff, 77,000 is a lot of money for that we're spending. That's gone in for a part. It's only a part of the year, but I probably can't do anything about that one. But it just seems a comment. It's a lot of money.
Yeah, if I comment on the inflation that was assumed in the budget for fees and charges, this was. I think this had been in the budget plan for some time. When we started to unpick this, it related to items or income lines that we weren't able to increase income because there would be statutory charges. We also found that there was the potential duplication, it was particularly on adults, about their assumptions in the budget. So it's something we should have picked up. But we didn't, so we've got to correct that. Yeah, it just seems strange that we tried to uplift things we weren't going to be able to. We should have known that when we set it, but there we go.
Again, that sounds like something that we passed in the budget that was not as robust as it should have been.
Yeah, can I just on robustness? I know I didn't use the word guarantee. I did not guarantee this budget. I did sign it off as being robust, and I did say at the time that doesn't mean every line of the budget will be delivered. In the round, I thought it was reasonable, and it was one that the council could approve. Authorities up and down the country, upper tier authorities dealing with care services, will be dealing with similar issues. And in saying that, I'm trying to demonstrate that dealing with care services and demand is not straightforward. However, for some of the savings, we should have done better on those in terms of the expectation around delivery. Children's, I think, was a difficult one at the time, because if you recall, whilst the budget was agreed in February, because a lot of the work around that is done in advance, and at a senior level in children's services, that was in quite a difficult place. And there was a lot of juggling in terms of workload. So the discussions we had in the round, we thought they were reasonable to go forward with. But for the reasons you've seen now, that turned out not to be the case.
Yeah, thank you. I think actually you've described quite well the concerns that this committee had. I mean, those of us that have been around recognise that upper tier authorities have huge pressures in sort of demand for both children's and adults, and it's the fact that we've been here year after year after year when these things have gone wrong, which was, I think, part of our conversation. So, I think we appreciate that.
Yeah,
so,
can I just add to that, Chair, that if you look on the back of your papers, you'll see a whole list of productivity improvement programmes. I don't know how many there are, 60 perhaps, 50, 60. The same happened last year. We had a stabilisation plan. A big chunk of that, 9 million, was not delivered. And that's fairly normal in these sort of programmes. So what you do, you put more than you need in, and as some deliver better, some don't deliver at all. So you're constantly looking for new productivity programmes, like the one just referred to in John, and that's going to be a feature of all this year. It's got to be, by doing that last year, we had a whole raft of programmes, then another lot, and that's why last year's numbers worked out. The same will apply this year, I've no doubt, because things will go wrong. might have a bad winter, who knows? And so therefore we'll have to react accordingly.
Thank you, and yeah, I think we appreciate that. The question for us as a scrutiny committee, however, will those changes throughout the year balance at the end of the year or not? And that's obviously where we need to get our confidence. I've got Cecile, Richard, Michael.
I'm sorry to put you on the spot. There is, as Ian Duncan said, when the budget was prepared in the round, he was happy in the detail at a granular level. Something will be delivered, something will not. But I think when you look at it, for example, the rent of Angel Square, we are going not to, and that is 500,000. We should have been a bit more careful. So I think for us, or for the position, you have services that were, you had savings that were unrealistic, or now you know they are not, they would not be realized. So we should maybe have them in a separate, in another category, just because they are dead in the water. So I think those ones should be very clear. And what is the mitigation? What I don't like in the way it's reported, because it's all over the place. It's much better than it used to be. But for me, simple mind, you have what you are under the water due to some pressure, and that we can understand and we can address, but you have some savings that are not going to be realized because in the time we were a bit optimistic or a bit, and those ones should be in another category because it's not the same than to have a demand than. So can you understand my gist? And I think it will help everybody to when it's dead in the water, to be clear about it. Thank you.
I think the point Cecile's making is that we knew at the start of this budget process there were things in that budget that were not going to be realised. We knew that almost as an absolute fact, and the question is whether they can be mitigated elsewhere. But please.
Just picking up a point in terms of presentation, what we've tried to do in the table of figures that exist for each service area. The first one we start with is budget delivery pressures, and I think we clearly spell out where there are shortfalls in savings. If that needs further clarification, then we can look at that. But reading that, I think you can see.
Yeah, I think it is. Clear. I think the frustration is the fact that we sort of, some of this doesn't come as any surprise, does it? I've got Richard and then Michael.
Yeah, thank you. I know that at the end of each budgetary narrative, if there are concerns, there are management mitigation, management actions. I'm just wondering, when we put the stabilisation plan in, that was like a bespoke response to the criticality of our situation. And I'm just wondering, is the stabilisation plan philosophy, easy for you to say, it now embedded in our financial management, or at what point do we introduce a similar approach to clamp down so we ensure that this 5.4 million doesn't grow? Does that make any sense? So are the things we did last year now embedded by development and by organic development of our finances, or do we need a bespoke stabilisation plan to respond specifically to the overspend that is projected? If that makes sense.
I think certainly NLT, the Cabinet are aware of the need to balance the budget in this year, and it's entirely possible. There's nothing planned at the moment, but if it became abundantly clear that there would be a shortfall, then I couldn't rule out the possibility that whatever it's called, something akin to a stabilisation plan may have to be considered. That's not active at this point in time, but I think that culture has to exist, that once a budget has been agreed, we must do all that we can to stay within it, particularly given our starting point. And I was just reflecting earlier, we're not the first authority that has been judged in our children's services to be inadequate. And you usually find that that judgment results in higher cost. The difference here is, unlike other places, authorities have to find that money from probably reserves to put into that in the short term. Our position is different, for all the reasons that everyone is aware of.
Let me just say a slightly less diplomatic approach to this, if I may. You know me, Richard, I'm not used to not hitting budgets. I've had a lifetime of doing this, and I intend to hit this budget if we possibly can. And I've got no sympathy for people that don't meet their budgets, none at all. And so that'll be my position, loud and clear.
Yeah, no, I think the answer is yes, there may be a sustainability plan this year. But okay. Anybody else? Jonathan? Oh, sorry, Michael. I do apologise.
How refreshing, Malcolm. Could we have a reprise of that? It's music to my ears, having been there and done that. And I've gone from being a gamekeeper, I suppose, to a bit of a poacher on this one. We were talking about the 5.4 million overspend, Mr. Chairman, on a budget of 116. No, it's actually 5.4 on here. Forecast variance. 5.4. Yeah, 5.4 on children's on a budget of 116 million. On a smaller scale, but more worrying in percentage terms, is what somebody, I think it was Councillor Stanborough mentioned earlier, is the corporate side of things. We've got an overspend here of almost 1.5 million on a far smaller budget of 25 million. Now, if you turn to page 102, under 575, can you explain why on these budget delivery pressures we have simply given up on £700,000 on a procurement review, and likewise on voluntary redundancy, almost £750,000 is unachievable? Why were these put in the budget in the first place if we're putting our hands up very early on in the year and saying basically they're unattainable?
And on the procurement one, if I remember when we discussed that at budget scrutiny, actually the narrative was we probably expect to save more than that.
Yeah, I can comment on those two. In terms of the percentage compared to budget, in the corporate area, these savings were in effect like a stretch target over the rest of the organisation. So the actual budgets are not contained within corporate. It's just that corporate was the place where we were reporting the same. So the total spend on contracts might be 500-600 million. That's not in the corporate budget. But the drive from that was coming from the corporate centre. It doesn't mean we've given up on it. This is a forecast that we have at this point in time. There is a procurement group. It met fairly recently to go through a number of issues and identify whether further opportunities existed, and we're waiting to have confirmation back on that. That may or may not improve the position, but we certainly haven't given up on it. Voluntary redundancy, there was another round, a third round of voluntary redundancies announced, I think it was about a month ago. I think they're due to come back to the leadership team sometime in August. So that again may result in a changed position. So I'm trying to demonstrate we haven't given up on these. But at this point in time, I think it would have been wrong of us if we said there aren't issues in these particular areas.
So are you expecting, Mr. Duncan, that in future reports, and coming to the end of Q1, you would expect to see a reduction in this overspend on corporate from 1.5 million downwards?
Well, that's certainly the intention.
Well, I don't think you expect to see it.
that's a difficult one to say. That
Can I come on that? If you want to get a very serious position on the year end, look at the half year. The first quarter gives us a good indicator of where we're going. We will take action based upon those numbers, and in my opinion, we should have the half year. If we should go on to the half year, and that's the one to take the final view of where we're going to end up on the year end. You get a really strong view then. Still a lot can change, but you get the strongest view at that point. First quarter is just giving you a strong indicator, indicating what you should be doing, but not definitive. Does that help? Yeah.
Okay, I've got Jonathan, Chris and Cecile. Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. Just going on a bit more on what we said about using our own accommodations. Chair, I'm just going to be wondering if it's wise that the committee here can actually recommend that we review all accommodations that are currently on the market before we sell them, and to see wherever those accommodations can be utilised in offsetting outside costs that are going to have an impact on it. If we can make savings in other areas and utilise accommodations before we dispose of them, then I think we need to have a review of that, especially along the likes of Grendon. And as Malcolm said, that he wished he had 50 projects like that. And also that is also going to be helpful because a lot of our own inside areas, we charge them for accommodation. Part of their budget, they then get charged for utilising the accommodations that we have. And is there any area we can streamline those costs? Like, I think, for instance, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but like Place pay, what, £1.3 million for their accommodations, if I'm right? And that was risen from 500,000 a year when they were down by the river. So how come they move to a smaller area and we charge them 800,000 a year more for a condensed area? So areas like that, you know, I think we ought to be able to see if we can have a review on those, especially before we start disposing of properties moving towards a unitary. And secondly, Ian, thank you very much for all your support that you've done here, and I hope you enjoy your second retirement and it lasts a bit longer than your first retirement.
Johnny isn't going till the half year.
So I'm trying to pick up your point, Jonathan. I guess what you're saying is that as a committee we would want to suggest maybe to Cabinet that any buildings that they are thinking of selling, should property in general, should be considered whether it can be utilised as part of the sort of building accommodation for children's agenda.
Children's or any other areas, because it seems like, as Malcolm says, that, you know, he wished he had like more projects, and if we could, like Grendon, for very small cost, we could make a very serious saving, then there must be other properties of similar use that we could probably change the use of at a minimum cost as well.
Chair, can I answer that? Surely that is done. You wouldn't just sell a property without looking at its usefulness to any other part of the organisation.
You would assume, Councillor.
Bring James in. Sorry. Yes, please do.
Up to a point, Chair. And essentially what the Scrutiny Committee is talking about is the Council's property strategy. Is it getting the best value from its assets by in the decisions it takes about whether to put them on the market or whether to retain them and use them for as part of services? There is, well, those kind of decisions should be taken within the council's property strategy. There is a property strategy. It's come up at scrutiny previously, and I think off-agenda information was circulated to the committee, albeit not quite so recently that I can that I have the gist of what that was at my fingertips. So I can understand why the committee is why Councillor Eakins has raised that, why it might be something that the committee could recommend. Whether that is already being done is a question that I'm not equipped to answer.
Sorry, I just wondered, I don't know if Jason can help us here, but as far as I was aware, there was a place board when this comes to every month. Am I right, Jason? There's a place shaping board.
Perhaps we could simply ask, as we have a Cabinet member in front of us, to take away this general concern.
I think it already exists.
Go talk to your colleagues, let us know.
Yeah, point well taken. So it's probably done. I don't know specifically if it's done or not, but it certainly should be if it isn't. So I can totally agree with that. One thing that's worthy of note here is that, again, you probably don't remember, but at the point when at the budget meeting, I said that there's also, not only could we look at our current properties, that's clearly the right thing to do, but more importantly, we could sell properties if they are indeed truly redundant to us, and use that cash for other productivity measures. You may recall I made that point. And this is a very good case in point. If you sold something that is, say, poor quality or something of that nature, and then put it into placement, like we've done with this 150,000, it's a refurb in this case, for 60,000 return, you'd do it. You'd do it every day of the week, wouldn't you? So it's two. It's not just what we've got. It's what you might sell to do other things. You know, there's two strands to this. Yeah.
And also, you're also sort of like, as you're just saying there, that you can then turn into revenue. But I'd like to know whether, if you have a property, which technically is paid for out of capital because it's an investment, if you sell that property, does that become revenue because you've sold it, or does it go back into the capital pot because that's where it originated from? So any profit that you do that, it goes into capital.
Capital receipt. Yes. So but you can use.
So exactly. So what I'm saying is, Chair, is that we can't sell a property and then use that money to prop up services.
What we don't want to do is to open up a discussion on the flexibility use of capital receipts. But again, I think Cabinet Member and Section 151 have a feel of what's being discussed, and yes, could we formally ask you to sort of take that to your colleagues and have a further discussion? Okay, right. I have Chris, then Cecile.
Thank you, Chair. So on other stuff then. So in the section on adult social services, paragraph 5.44, there's reported a release of nearly £3.2 million worth of contract inflation out of a total budget of just over £4.9 million to mitigate demand pressures in the service. Is that contractual demand pressures, i.e. the price has gone up, so we're releasing some of the contract inflation, or have we made a judgment that we don't need as much in our budget for contract inflation and therefore we can release it to mitigate other pressures?
Yes, my understanding of this one, where there's contractual inflation involved, we have to pay that if it's in accordance with the contract. I think it's often a judgment call around the cost of care and the fees that are needed to pay for that. The judgment's been taken by Anna and her team that this amount can be released.
I'd go further than that. I mean, anybody that's ever been involved in budgeting takes a view of things like inflation. You've got to take a view on what inflation going to be next year and have a discussion. You go on for half an hour. And so Anna, being extremely good at budgeting, would have put a figure there that she can deliver. And that's what that's all about. Good news. Maybe there's some more.
So my concern is that we've released part of the budget for contractual inflation to mitigate something that is not contractual inflation. It's described as a demand pressure. So contractual inflation is an entirely predictable figure by definition. The clues in name. Was it the clues in the name? I'd be interested to know whether this is demand pressures that have been mitigated or contractual inflation pressures that have been mitigated by this amount, because it's a significant sum of money. But we can return to that.
You're sure you're right on that, Chris? This is released, not mitigating. This is released. Yeah. You understand? Yeah.
I'll pursue it elsewhere, maybe, just so I can be sure. Section 38 funds. what I'm trying to understand, and I know we've had an exchange on this previously, but very clearly is in the 17-18 accounts, there was amount in for Section 38 funding, which the auditors challenged. We agreed that...
Right, let me give you the backdrop to this one.
Can I ask my question, Malcolm, first, please? Can I ask my question? So, how does the treatment in 18-19, because there was something in the outturn about it, and in the current year, differ from the way Section 38 funds were treated in 17-18, please?
You have a go, or do you want to do it? We're arguing about who wants to answer this one. We're keen to do it. The Section 38, for those that aren't familiar with it, this is money that's paid from primarily developers for long-term road maintenance. And you can either... You've got two options here. You either take it in the year you receive it, which is what we've done last year and this year, or you could say, no, we'll let it out bit by bit over 10, 20, whatever time you take. My personal position on this, I'm quite relaxed either way it goes, because the reason I am relaxed about it, because the money's in the bank, the cash is in the bank. So whether you choose to put it in this year or put it over 10, 15 years, is neither here nor there, in my opinion. And the general view was that we'd put it in at the end of last year, 3.1 million, and I was, again, quite relaxed whether it was in or out, because either way we would have been across the line. Okay, it would have been 1.5 instead of 4.5. So not in the margins that. There's 2.4, I think I'm right in saying, in this year's budget. And again, I'm pretty relaxed whether it's in that or not. So the auditors will have a discussion with them, and we'll go left or right on it. Not an issue in my view.
So, I mean, in the 17-18 that Chris was referring to, the auditors took a very strong view that what we were doing was wrong, and that in part led to the negative balance at the end of the year.
Yeah, can I pick up on 17-18, where the accounts were almost agreed yesterday. In 17-18, the auditors didn't judge that we couldn't do it. What we didn't pursue with them for that year was a full justification why we thought it was reasonable. The issue in accounting terms is, when can you recognise that income in your accounts? When are you free to spend it? That wasn't pursued in 17-18. In 18-19, we are in discussion with our new auditors around that. We haven't reached agreement with them yet. They understand the argument we've put forward. The argument we've put forward is, at essence, the contract on the one part, the developer pays a sum of money, and for our part, we guarantee that we will maintain those highways forevermore. And our view is, once you've given that undertaking and that guarantee, you can recognise the income. And that's the discussion. And it is an accounting discussion. As Malcolm said,
but clearly the outcome of that discussion will inform what happens this year.
Yeah. Now, clearly, if the finding is that you can't recognise that income immediately, it will place a pressure on the numbers in here. And that, again, is why we've been quite clear about that.
So my question was, how does the treatment in 18-19 and 19-20 of Section 38 funds differ from the way we treated them in 17-18? It sounds to me like we're treating them exactly the same in 18-19, 19-20 as we did in 17-18, but there's an issue around the way we had the conversation with the auditors and the way we sought their approval. So, which sounds like something that's really quite technical, and we could end up in the same position again.
Well, there's no doubt it really is technical. We didn't spend time engaging with the auditors in 17-18, but the treatment in the accounts is the same. What we are rehearsing with them is our full justification. That didn't exist in 17-18.
Cecile.
Being at audit yesterday, I can confirm what Ian Duncan has said about the Section 38, because we spent quite a lot of time on that. And the account should be signed, the 17-18 account should be signed very soon now. So we are satisfied about the account. Now, Malcolm, you said you want to do the budget, and we all want to do the budget because we have no resilience this year. And that is what's said when we presented the budget. The thing is, last year government helped us a lot. This year we have to stand on our own 2 feet. And unfortunately, with what we have from Ofsted, and we had a very hot summer, we might have a cold winter, that is... So now I will ask you maybe an unfair question, or Ian can do before he leaves us forever. At what point you think you will be worried if we go south?
I'll be worried until the final accounts are signed off at the end of this year. You may recall last year it was never drawn on whether we'd complete on time or not, and you can't be, because I mean events happen, and they'll undoubtedly happen here. Because I say, it could be a hot summer, could be anything. All you can do is put the best shot at a point in time. And as I said to Mike earlier on, you'll probably get your best view at the half year. But even then, you've got a winter to come. And we will continue to take actions consistently. You know, you got to.
Can I just add the assistance in terms of government assistance, the 70 million capitalisation, in fact, didn't contribute to the outcome of 18-19. The capitalisation eliminated the deficit. It created a reserve of £20 million, and it allowed us to deal with some legacy issues, i.e. prior to 18-19, and also we were able to top up a balance in an earmarked reserve. So in terms of 18-19, we stood on our own 2 feet, but it was... Yeah, it wasn't straightforward, and as we know, there were a number of one-off measures in there. They weren't all recurring.
Yeah, I'm not going to open that. Michael.
Mr. Chairman, just picking up on last topics, not strictly speaking in the report, but very relevant to where we stand. I think if I had some spare cash at the moment and I was able to put it into a stock, I'd buy into KPMG. Certainly, looking at the £500,000 overspend, if that's the right word, on the audit fee for 17-18, that was quite an achievement. I think we'd categorise 17-18 as an annus horribilis, and little else, I think, really fits that description. Looking ahead to 18-19, and having parted company with KPMG, can you give us an assurance that the audit fee which has been agreed with NCC for Ernst & Winnie's work is going to be met and will not be subject to that sort of massive overspend?
Unfortunately, I can't give that guarantee. The way the audits were tendered by PSA, Public Service Auditors Appointments, there was a scale fee set which would represent good value for money. But for a high-risk audit, such as here, scale fees won't apply. Now, we don't know what their bill will be, but we already know they will be applying for an increase above the standard scale fee. If it was anything like KPMG's, I'd be surprised and incredibly disappointed. I don't think that we've got the same number of issues that KPMG were dealing with. I would hope we would respond more quickly than we were able to previously, because the longer we take to respond, the meter's ticking. KPMG did tell us yesterday they may issue a public interest report, in which case the fee may continue to be increasing. So I think, well, it will be an increase on the scale fee, but it shouldn't be anything like we've seen for 17-18.
Well, just to follow that up, Mr. Chairman, could you, not guarantee, but give us an assurance that this will be the subject of a negotiation with the new auditors? Because, I mean, at NCC we're under enormous pressure at the chalk face on getting our scarce resource through to looked after children and every other group that needs our support. We're really not in the business here to line the pockets of auditors or tax advisors or anybody else. So what I think we need to hear from you is that you will negotiate hard, or your successor will, when they come with another shopping list and another huge prospective bill, which they expect to be signed off automatically.
So before you answer that, can I ask a sort of supplementary to that? KPMG said that they were charging extra because it was a high-risk audit, which appears to be some sort of formal term. They also said the only other one that they were involved with was Northampton Borough Council across the road. You're saying that EY are already saying that there will be an increase in their fees. Does that mean that the 18-19 accounts are already being considered a high-risk audit, whatever that means?
Yeah, yes, that is the case. And a high-risk audit means that their levels of materiality are reduced quite considerably, and they will do more checking in terms of various transactions that run through our accounts, which means more time to investigate, hence an increase in fee. To reassure members, we won't simply be accepting the first number that comes along. What I haven't had from the new auditor yet is just what that figure will be that they're seeking and the reasons for that. All I'm saying well in advance is it will be above the scale.
Yeah.
Yes, because
can I just expand on that a little bit, Mike? That anybody that was at audit yesterday would have heard the chief auditor say that the materiality is if it's a low risk, it's 2%. If it's a high risk, i.e. us, it's 0.5%. So that's the significance of it.
Yes, yesterday at audit, first it was recognised that our officers were very good, albeit a bit not enough of them, but they were very good. And the independent chairman of audit is going to make sure that the dates that, because we have the day per audit, are the proper and the right amount of day, because that is the way the fees are calculated in some way or another. So the audit committee will look with, and we didn't like to see the £500,000 extra for KPMG. And I think this year, and also we have to remember that KPMG, and you can change me, that was the last time because we changed, and they didn't want to have anything to come back because they don't want Ernst & Young to come back to them. So it was even more with the Finecom that where Ernst & Young, they just start, so maybe they will be, they will give assurance, but KPMG, I think, it was belt and trousers, and we pay for it.
Add to that, Mr. Chairman, on the same topic, one of the principal reasons we got into big trouble in 17-18 were challenges from KPMG on the improper use of capital receipts for the expenditure programme. And that's what's pushed the thing up to 35-40 million negotiable, when it was originally promised just over 18 months ago we'd balance the budget by somebody else. However, what we want is an assurance that as things stand, the homework has been done, and auditors will not be challenging the way that NCC has treated capital receipts in the 18-19 year. Can you give us that assurance?
I'm going to surprise you now and say yes. We've had discussions with Ernst & Young about flexible use of capital receipts. The figure in 18-19 was £2.8 million. They've essentially said that's fine. Yeah.
I think fingers were burnt and lessons learned, weren't they? And I'd be very worried if that were not the case, to be honest. Indeed. Anything else? I want to open the conversation up a little bit to, I'll bring in a second, a little bit to how we can help influence next year's budget, and I think there is something we need to discuss about that. But in the meanwhile, Jonathan.
Yes, please, Chair. And I wanted to go back on our asset review. Apparently it's been maybe brought to my attention that there's no member involvement on that. It's officer-led. Why are officers making the decisions on disposing the assets of Northamptonshire County Council without member input, shall we say? But I would stand to be corrected on that if I'm wrong.
If there were to be one, is sat among the people.
But I would like to know that if that is the case, because obviously we represent the people of Northamptonshire, and it should be the members that have the final say on whether we dispose of assets or not.
Well, I can tell you that I sign off everything.
Okay, anything else? In that case, I want to talk, as I say, about how we can perhaps help influence the saving proposals in next year's budget. Now, we first, as a committee, spoke about this back in, March, April of this year, and this was following direct advice from the Centre for Public Scrutiny, how important it would be to help inform that. Now, I know it's difficult for the Cabinet because they haven't necessarily got all their proposals ready, which is why they don't want to, announce them to the public. And I think, Ian, you suggested maybe that this committee could form have a briefing or some sort of working group in August of this year, so we may be able to get involved in that process, because we are on the cusp of August. We're almost, where we'll be deciding on the budget.
Yes, in the discussions we had, in terms of your involvement, what I did offer was a briefing in August about the likely financial position that we will face, and which will be a helpful backdrop as to consideration around some of the decisions that will have to be taken around the budget. What has changed since we spoke about that? We're expecting to bring, now that there's a Cabinet meeting in August, where it will consider the period 3, quarter 1 report. There'll also be a report on there about our likely financial position in 2021 and beyond, to help for the purposes of unitary planning. But what I'm more than happy to do is come along and speak to you on an informal basis about some of the detail behind that, because understanding that starting point, I think, is an important requirement.
I think that would be a useful conversation for us to have an idea on what the finances overall look like. However, I think I speak from the committee because we've discussed this before. What we do not want to end up doing is in December spending every day for 2-3 weeks looking at the individual proposals in next year's budget. We really desperately want to help begin that process beforehand. Now, how that works, I accept it's difficult, but we need to have a conversation about that.
Yeah, I think you're right. The earlier you get involved in any good ideas, I've said it a dozen times, better be having them. One of the things, I'd go back on my earlier point of the half year. That's a very good driver to see, you've got a half year under your belt. You see what year end much more clearly. Not precise, but clear. And that's a very good time to start looking at what the rollover is likely to be.
I have a suggestion, but before I do, anybody want to contribute on that topic? Chris.
One of the things we've said previously, Chair, is that what we ought to look at is the things that didn't change in the budget for the current year, and that might be a good starting point to providing some challenge around current expenditure and areas that Scrutiny considers might be suitable for the Cabinet to be considering as part of their own proposals, without looking at what the proposals that are going to come forward in due course. So I think we ought to try and facilitate that as a matter of urgency.
My suggestion, proposal, is around the fact that Centre for Public Scrutiny, we know, have said previously that if you wait until December to look at the next year's budget, you're doing scrutiny wrong. So I would suggest that we perhaps try and get a conversation with them about what they would suggest to move this forward.
Chair.
Oh.
In effect, we have. So, through you, Chair. So, at the start of 2019, after the last budget scrutiny review, the committee did a very short piece of work on best practice in relation to budget scrutiny, designed to pick up many of the issues that are coming through the discussion today. That was quite significantly informed by a broad model for budget scrutiny through the year that the Centre for Public Scrutiny put out. It may indeed have been in the same blog that made the point about if you're doing it like this, you're doing it wrong. If you're doing it like that, you're doing it wrong. Here are the principles you should be following. So, in very broad terms, because I won't go through no, actually, I don't need to go through it fully, because if members refer to page 119 of their agenda papers, you will see it set out there, which is the model that the Centre for Public Scrutiny identified as good practice in relation to budget scrutiny, and the model that this committee subsequently said it would like to follow as far as possible in relation to your work.
Okay, so from September, we should be liaising with officers and department by department to look at these issues. But how is that going to work in practice? That's really what I want to understand.
Okay. Good question. We must talk about this. So just one question, if I could put to you, Chairman. We've got a meeting with the commissioners at 2:00, and our tummies are rumbling here as well. So could we wrap this up by 1:45, possibly?
Well, I think we're finishing off here. I think perhaps the chair and vice chairs need to have a discussion around this timetable, because, as I say, at the moment I don't understand how this is going to work.
And we're open to suggestions on this, Mike.
Sorry?
We're open to suggestions.
Yeah. Okay. In that case, we can probably bring the questioning to a close, unless there's anything else for Ian and Malcolm. Okay. In that case, all I would want to do then is give committee once again the opportunity briefly, if you've got any specific points that you want to be raised in a commentary or conclusions or recommendations, be my guest. Okay. I think in that case we'll rely on the discussions we've had and the minutes that have been taken, and look forward to the third monthly report, period 3 as it's now called, which will be published next week or so. Thank you very much, Ian. Thank you very much, Malcolm. Appreciate it as always. Which brings us on to item, is it 8 on today's agenda, which is the work programme for this committee and any responses to previous resolutions. James.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and be brief. This is the standard report which gives the committee the opportunity to take stock of its work programme and modify it as it sees necessary. Section 4 of the report sets out what the committee has identified as a topic for its next formal meeting. So there is one slot there to be added to, whether that's done today or at the pre-meeting next week. Report then goes on to identify the 2 working groups, which is the maximum that the committee can have at any one time, that it does currently have in progress. The LGSS Joint Overview and Scrutiny Working Group, and the scrutiny review of Northamptonshire Highway Services contract. Just to add on the LGSS working group, so paragraph 5.1, that did meet on the 15th of July 2019 to basically re-establish the working group and to get an overview of the current position relating to LGSS development. That current position was subject to discussion at the LGSS Joint Committee on the 26th of July. The working group agreed that it would seek to have a meeting again after that, most likely in September. Firstly, to look at the implications of any decisions taken by the Joint Committee meeting on the 26th of July, and secondly, to consider the future of joint scrutiny, including whether that is still required in light of those decisions. Paragraph 4.2 of the report goes on to set out a number of possible topic areas that the committee has identified. And then Appendix 1 of the report, page 121 onwards, provides information on responses to previous resolutions by the committee, which I think are broadly positive. There aren't many, if any, outstanding areas. Happy to take any questions on what I've said or what's set out in the report, Chairman. Otherwise, over to members.
Thank you, James. I would suggest that actually we leave the second substantive item for further discussion at our pre-meeting, which is coming up, unless others have a view. Yeah, absolutely, I'll come on to that. I've got them written down at the end of my notes here. Just before I bring Michael in, Jonathan and myself were at the LGSS scrutiny meeting, if anybody has any questions, but basically we're waiting for the LGSS committee to make their recommendations before there's much to say on that. Michael.
Just really a technical question, Mr. Chairman. You may not be able to answer it, but when I had dealings with LGSS and we were flagging up the withdrawal of NCC from things like the democratic services side and the payroll side of things, from the accounts which were then brought back to Angel Square. Certain, stronger than hints, it was more threats were made about financial penalties to be incurred by NCC as a result of that. Are you aware of that having been proceeded with by LGSS? Has NCC suffered any financial penalties by virtue of withdrawing certain of the services from the corporate centre?
I am personally not aware of that, well, yes, absolutely, but given where the LGSS might be going anyway, that might become a more pertinent question for lots of people, and I think probably that will be a question for after the committee next meet and comes to a decision. James.
I'm in no position to speak with any great knowledge on this subject, but what I might add is I think there's a distinction between the withdrawal of services and the withdrawal of an authority from the whole LGSS concept. So the three partner authorities, Northamptonshire, Cambridgeshire and Milton Keynes, have and I think always have had different services in and out of LGSS, and indeed Northamptonshire County Council Democratic Services was part of LGSS and then withdrew. I think this was about a year ago, if I remember correctly, and so there's a distinction between services delivered that are part of LGSS and authorities that are partners in LGSS. I'm in no position to comment on the point about penalties that Councillor Clark made, though.
Well, on behalf of Councillor Clark and this committee, trying to find out and get an answer to that.
Did we incur any?
Okay, James, I'm sure, or Ben will try and follow that up. Before we finish off, we have, as James has alluded, we have one working group already set up, which is looking at highways issues and the highways contract, which is pertinent, given that the council have just decided that they're probably likely to extend it for a year or two. Jonathan, are you able, as chairman, to give us a very brief overview as to where you're at so far?
Yeah, very briefly, but if I may suggest for the second working group, if we can, it could be a very short job, look into the properties that we discussed earlier and the disposal of for a quick fix into probably fixing some funding gaps. But getting back onto the highways one, yes, I've had a number of meetings already with certain interested parties within the NCC working in the Highways Department. I have to say that at the moment it's a little bit difficult in certain areas of being, should we say, not having access to all the documents that we require, which I believe now is actually work in progress, and certain documents are now being released for our observation, shall we say, and look at. I'm yet to have any really in-depth details on the care structure, but I'm sure that we're moving in the right direction on that way. By the time that we sit down, I think, which is about the 29th of August with the working group, is I'll have some preliminary pointers and directions of progress and directions of where we should be going and what we should be looking at. And as you very kindly allowed me to include Councillor Perry now into that working group, as she's informed me she's got a little bit of time for doing a bit of research that I haven't got the time to do, and she's quite willing to take that on, and I'm pretty sure that will actually uncover some more areas where we need to have a look at. But other than that, it is work in progress. It has been a bit slow over the last couple of weeks, but we're slowly removing those obstacles and actually getting at the areas where we need to.
It's good to
happy
hear.
To take any questions.
Yeah, good to hear. Any questions for Jonathan? I'm just coming up to all the relevant dates that you will need if there's nothing else from today. The next... sorry. Okay. The next pre-meeting of our formal meeting is on the 7th of August, 10 o'clock here. The next month's committee meeting will be the 28th of August, 10 o'clock here. For those that wish to attend, there will be an informal meeting just to look at the Cabinet papers that are going to Cabinet on Tuesday the 13th of August, and we will meet on Friday the 9th of August, 2 p.m. in the afternoon, venue to be announced, and that again is just for anyone to talk about what's going up to Cabinet in case Scrutiny want to pass any comments or questions when we get to the formal Cabinet meeting. James.
One point on the Highway Services Contract Working Group, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn in relation to the working group chair here. The original project brief talked about the final draft report and recommendations being brought back to this committee on the 28th of August 2019. When that was set, I think there was an acknowledgement that that was a very minimal timescale and it might be necessary to extend it, which is perfectly appropriate providing it's done by this committee in a controlled way. Given that the next working group meeting is scheduled for the 29th of August, it seems appropriate that the committee has asked to consider extending the time frame for the scrutiny review. The next opportunity for it to report after the 28th of August would be the committee meeting on the 25th of September.
If I may, Chair. Take it on board. Unfortunately, with progress being hindered by allowance into certain areas and certain questioning and certain witnesses, I do recommend that we extend that timescale to... In fact, I can't give a date, but it certainly will be within the next 3 months at least. But because obviously we have to set meetings and committee meetings to get all people meeting up. So I would say yes, it would need to be extended. As to a timescale, I'm unable to give an indication of that at this time.
Could we ask you to report back to the next formal meeting and maybe then we can have a further discussion on that? You might have an idea.
The next formal meeting, Chair, unfortunately, is the day before we have our first or second group meeting. So we can't go... I mean, I did ask Ben earlier if we could probably bring that in line with the meeting and have it in the afternoon, but it will happen after the next meeting. So,
sorry, James. And keep chairs and vice chairs perhaps involved. Sorry, Wendy, did you want to come in on this?
That we seem to go over every meeting. Would it be more realistic to put some more realistic timings on the agenda?
In fairness, it's very difficult to. Yeah.
It's very difficult.
Point taken. Okay, if there's nothing else, I would like to thank you all for attending once again. It has been, again, a long meeting, but I think hopefully useful and constructive. Thank you.